Chapter 130. Borrowing the influence of the defeat on the battlefield, he used a lot of resources to build an altar in the city. The demon lord continued, and then he convinced many elders and that elder of mine to agree to sacrifice the souls of the demon warriors that had died on the battlefield to the starry sky. Upon hearing the words, sacrifice to the starry sky, Chen Chongqing had a very bad premonition. He asked, sacrifice to whom, and what request? The demon lord mocked, it's naturally to offer sacrifices to the sacred light continent on the other side of the starry sky. Those elders hope that the sacred light continent can come to our aid, and some cowardly nobles even hope that they can be sent back to the sacred light continent. This way, they naturally won't have to face the danger and pain of their race being exterminated. Chen Chongqing said, hasn't the demon race been erased? How did they know? In the past 6 months, the flames of war have been incessant, and the situation is chaotic. Many rules have lost their effectiveness, and many secrets have naturally been leaked. The demon lord turned to a certain grand scholar. One of the grand scholars suddenly paled, and then he began to vomit blood. The blood wasn't red, golden, or green. It was black. The great scholar was obviously poisoned. He said painfully, even if I don't say it, the counselor knows everything. The demon lord calmly replied, but you still said it. The scholar fell to the ground, twitched twice, and stopped breathing. The demon lord turned to the crowd, primarily Su Yorong, and said apologetically, my apologies. Chen Chongqing didn't notice, he was thinking about what he just said. The upper echelons of the demon race had pinned their hopes on that altar, so it was naturally difficult for them to do their best on the battlefield, regardless of whether it was subjective or otherwise. In this way, the situation of the demon race will be even worse. And the worse it is, the more they will place their hopes on the altar. That sacrificial altar was just like the swamp outside Xuelao City. Anyone who landed on it would find it very difficult to stand up, no matter how much they struggled. The demon lord should have seen this very clearly, so why did he not stop Black Robe? Why wasn't the altar destroyed? The demon lord looked at Chen Chongqing and said, I presume that you have already guessed. Correct, I also wish to hold onto this final hope. Chen Chongqing asked, even if it goes against the will of the substitute demon king? The demon lord sighed. I also didn't want to, but I was forced too hard by you lot. Chen Chongqing said, you already did it 10 years ago. This was referring to the 2 angels that had appeared in White Emperor City. There will be a huge difference. The demon lord looked at him and seriously said, because the numbers are different. After saying this, he opened his arms. His black cloak fluttered despite the lack of wind. The demonic flames that seemed to have solidified the darkness of the night also began to sway, and some things were faintly discernible. Those were stone statues. Some were tall, some were short, but they were all less than a foot in height. They were neither gold nor jade. It was unknown what material they were made of. Some of the stone statues were half squatting, and some were flapping their wings as if they were about to take flight. The fine details were clearly visible, as if they were alive. They had already surpassed the scope of carving. Chen Chongqing's expression became very serious. The stone statue did not give off any aura, but it gave off an extremely strange feeling, as if it could come to life at any time. Wang Po and the others felt a strong sense of vigilance in their hearts. Just like Chen Chongqing, they recalled the 2 angels in White Emperor City, recalled Bi Yanghong. If every stone statue was an angel, how many of them were there in the forest? The demonic flames danced unceasingly. The night was restless and deathly silent. Many questions had been answered. Black Robe's hatred for the human race was truly as deep as the Western Sea. In order to exterminate the human race, he would stop at nothing. In the last several hundred years, he had hoped to rely on the demon race to exterminate the human race, but when he realized that the situation had changed and this mission became impossible, he had immediately chosen another path. He had mercilessly pushed the demon race on the path of defeat, using the shortest amount of time to force the demon race into desperate straits, forcing the demon race to follow his own pace. He had mobilized countless resources to construct a sacrificial altar and prepare to welcome the descent of the angel army from the sacred light continent. Just what is the meaning of your story tonight? Chen Chongqing asked the demon lord. The demon lord's smile faded. He looked into his eyes and calmly and firmly said, "Withdraw from Shulao City, or else I will agree to Black Robe's request." "This is a good story," Wangpa said. The Tang Old Master agreed. "It truly is a good story." This story, or to be more precise, the way this story was told, made them feel that the Demon Lord was very extraordinary. If not for the fact that the Demon Lord had been given too little time and that the general trend had been set, perhaps the demon race really might have welcomed a revival. At the start, if the Demon Lord had not invited those historians and scholars, used words like extermination and civilization to create a solemn and stirring atmosphere, and instead directly told this story, no one would have believed him. They would only think that he was using an absurd reason to stall for time. But the Demon Lord did not do this. From the sacred light continent to God and then to Black Robe, he slowly narrated the story, moving one's heartstrings. He had perfectly told this story, historical and weighty, forcing one to believe it. "But I have a question. What does Black Robe need you to do?" Wangpa said, "If you have no meaning to this story, then no matter how well you tell it, it would be meaningless. What he needs is not me, but this." The Demon Lord extended his right hand out of his sleeve. He did not have a stone statue in his hand, but a stone pestle. The stone pestle looked ordinary, but it was not. Even the stone pearls on Chen Chongqing's wrist responded and lightly bumped against each other. The stone pestle and the heavenly tome monoliths came from the same place and were made of the same material, but they had completely different uses. Astral annihilation. The secret of the demon race. A supreme divine artifact that had not appeared in the world for tens of thousands of years. In the snowy mountains, the old demon lord had died to the starlight summoned by this pestle. Chen Chongqing had personally seen the astral executioner. Afterward, the Li Palace priests had drawn the astral executioner into a painting based on his description and sent it to the various provinces. People like the Tang Old Master and Wang Po were naturally among the first to see the painting. With just a glance, they were sure that this was the real astral executioner. Thus, the story told by the Demon Lord had more truth to it. If the Demon Lord and Black Robe worked together, using the sacrificial altar and the astral executioner to open up a spatial path, allowing the angels of the sacred light continent to descend. As the demon flames danced, the stone statues became faintly discernible. Looking at this scene, everyone's expression became extremely solemn. Even if these angels were not as powerful as the two battle angels that had appeared in White Emperor City. But based on later analysis, those angels could naturally comprehend the natural laws of the world. In other words, from the moment they existed, they were experts of the divine domain. Of course, the human race was not completely unprepared for this most perilous situation. In the last 10 years, the Great Zhou Imperial Court, the Li Palace, and the various sects and clans had often simulated the Battle of White Emperor City, searching for a way to kill the angels of sacred light, and they had made some progress. However, this had been built on the premise that the angels were very few in number. At present, the human race's experts of the divine domain were either heavily injured or in rebellion. If there were so many angels, how could they win? Even more terrifying was that, if the god of the sacred light continent personally descended, what would happen? Would the human race be destroyed? The mood was extremely oppressive. But there were still people who did not believe the Demon Lord's story. "Isn't this a club made of stone? Do you really think we're clubs? Tian Chui died 10-some years ago," Xiao Zhang said. "We prepared for so many years, fought for so long, lost so many people, and you want us to retreat with just a story? These words moved Divine General He Ming and a few others. What if it was true? The Demon Lord was trying to scare them. The wrinkles at the corners of the Tang Old Master's eyes deepened, faintly tinged with worry. He felt that the Demon Lord's words were true. Wang Pu and Su Yorong also thought the same. Chen Chongqing had once seen with his own eyes that pillar of light traversing through the sea of stars, so he should have believed this story the most. But he vaguely remembered that the astral executioner could no longer be used, and then he recalled the conversation he had heard that night. He turned to the Demon Lord and asked, "The sacrificial altar is used to break through walls? The astral executioner is used to point out the location?" The Demon Lord replied, "I didn't think that you would remember my conversation with Father." Chen Chongqing said, 10 years ago, 2 angels descended. You could treat them as slaves, but Black Robe's current plan is clearly not limited to this. If too many angels descend, what will you do? So you've always been hesitating, struggling. Even now, you still haven't made up your mind on what to do. The Demon Lord smiled. Yes, so I leave this choice for you to make. Chen Chongqing fell silent. Now that he thought about it, many of the contents of those 10 years of correspondence had been the Demon Lord's methods. This was a process of imperceptible influence. He was already finding it very difficult to convince himself that the threat of the Sacred Light Continent did not exist. This so-called choice was more like a gamble. The wager was the entire human race. In terms of gambling, Su Yorong and the Tang Old Master were far better than him, but they had never seen those letters. The contents of those letters were the cards that the Demon Lord had already played. Only through those cards could one attempt to determine what the Demon Lord's trump card was. Suddenly, a voice came from the back of the crowd. This voice was sickly and weak to the extreme, yet it also seemed extremely smug. Anyone who heard it would easily find it annoying. What he wrote in the letters was true, and the majority of this story was also true, but what he said was false. The Demon Lord turned to the back of the crowd and arched his brows. Why? Because there's a will to die on your face, and there's also a tinge of emotional pain, but you're not in high spirits. Back then, I used 2 hours to reverse the situation in Wenshui, and after leaving the ancestral hall, I took a bath on the street. Even if you don't have my romantic bearing, and can't do such an elegant thing, you should still be a little more arrogant after completing this reversal. Such composure can only mean that you're lying. Yi Xiaoyan pushed a wheelchair out from the back of the crowd. Tang 36 sat on it. To be continued. Chapter 131. Tang 36's tone of voice had always been one of the most hateful existences in the world. Even when he was not cursing, no one liked it. But Chen Chongqing liked Tang 36 because Tang 36 was his best friend. More importantly, when he needed help the most, Tang 36 would always appear. Moreover, Tang 36 knew Chen Chongqing's true thoughts better than him. Whenever Chen Chongqing didn't know what to choose, listening to Tang 36 was always the right choice. Tang 36's words were naturally illogical, but for some reason, they had an inexplicable persuasiveness. Why did you come? Chen Chongqing was very worried about Tang 36's body. Based on Tang 36's complexion, his strange fever had probably subsided, but his body was probably extremely weak, or else he would not be sitting in a wheelchair. Tang 36 replied, "How could such an important moment in history be missing from my presence?" The Tang Old Master coldly stared at him, preparing to reprimand him. "Don't force me to expose my own dirty linen." After saying this, Tang 36 began to cough. Yi Xiaoyan hurriedly patted his back. Tang 36 waved his hand and took a pure white handkerchief from his sleeve to cover his mouth. His brow slightly creased as if in pain. Neither the Tang Old Master nor Chen Chongqing could tell if this sentimental scholar's actions were real or fake, so it was naturally not good to pursue the matter. Su Yorong glanced at Yi Xiaoyan. Yi Xiaoyan somewhat shamefully lowered her head. She knew that these two had not gone to Mount Han and had turned back midway. Tang 36 ignored this and said to the Demon Lord, "I forgot to introduce myself." The Demon Lord replied, "I recognize you." Tang 36 replied, "That's right, back in White Emperor City, you were truly rude to me. You didn't expect that 10 years later I would be exposed, did you?" The Demon Lord calmly replied, "You truly are the best in the world at talking to yourself." Tang 36 replied, "It seems that you truly do not know who I am." The Demon Lord mocked, "Do you think that you can become Suli like this?" Tang 36 sternly replied, "Please allow me to introduce myself. I am Sir's pen friend." The Demon Lord froze. "Pen friend?" Tang 36 replied, "Yes, Your Majesty, I have read all your letters, and the first 4 letters sent to Sir were all written by me." The Demon Lord turned to Chen Chongxing and very seriously said, "This is a little excessive." Chen Chongxing explained seriously, "I'm not good at dealing with people, and we weren't familiar with each other at the beginning, so I was afraid that it would be too awkward." The Demon Lord recalled the contents of those letters and sighed, "I had thought that you had taken me as a close friend from the very beginning. Your Majesty, I still regard you as my confidant, and I'm still willing to be your best friend." Tang 36 said to the Demon Lord, "So, dear friend, give me that thing in your hand." The Demon Lord calmly gazed at him and suddenly asked, "Just where does your confidence come from?" Tang 36 said, "I don't know, but my grandfather doesn't want to play cards with me." The Demon Lord said, "Not even the Tang Old Master is willing to play, so I presume that your mahjong skills are rather impressive. My playing skills are actually very ordinary, far worse than Grandpa's and the Saintess's. However, I have a trick that can win the whole world." Tang 36 said seriously, "I'm best at flipping the table. If I can't flip the table, then I'll bet my entire fortune." The Tang clan is the wealthiest clan of the human race. If you bet your entire fortune with someone else, you'll naturally win every time. The Demon Lord mocked, "But if you want to bet your entire fortune with me, you probably don't have as many chips as I do." These words were true. No matter how rich the Tang clan was or how deep its resources, how could it compare to the master of the demon domain? Tang 36 seriously said, "That's not necessarily true." A voice suddenly rang out, "I'll follow." The speaker was Su Yorong, her expression very calm. Wang Po also brought scholarly manner. More and more people followed. Chen Chongsheng and the Tang Old Master said nothing. Everyone knew what they would do. Tang 36 sat in his wheelchair, staring into the Demon Lord's eyes, his expression unprecedentedly serious. This gambling game was not wagering on the Tang clan or the Li Palace, but on the entire human race. The Demon Lord fell quiet for a very long time, then suddenly asked, "Do the conditions in the letters still hold?" Chen Chongxing replied, "Of course." Tang 36 said, "I'll give you the greatest discount, as in the 11th letter." "Okay." The Demon Lord threw the stone pestle at Tang 36. Tang 36 caught the stone pestle with his right hand, glanced at it, and then threw it back to the Tang Old Master. Such an important divine artifact, something that could change the fate of the world, was like a worthless toy in their hands. No one, including Chen Chongxing, was surprised by Tang 36's performance. He had never taken anything more precious seriously. Many years ago, in White Emperor City, he had also casually thrown the Orthodoxy's divine staff to Chen Chongxing. Only Yi Xiaoyan, pushing the wheelchair, knew that this was not the case. She could clearly see that when Tang 36 caught the stone pestle, the clothes on his back were instantly drenched in sweat. It was clear that he was extremely nervous. The Demon Lord looked at Tang 36 and asked, "Are you really not afraid?" Tang 36 confidently replied, "I'm not an idiot, so how could I not be afraid?" The Demon Lord was confused. "Then why do you appear so calm? I can't see any flaws?" "Perhaps it's because I grew up rather wealthy." Tang 36 added, whether it's material or mental. In their final conversation that night, Shang Xingzhou had mentioned that Black Robe might still have other tricks up her sleeve, but Chen Chongqing did not need to care too much. It now appeared that this was Black Robe's final move, but he had not expected the Demon Lord's opposition to be so intense. Regardless of whether the astral executioner could still be used, it was now in the Tang Old Master's hands. Even if Black Robe appeared, he would not be able to snatch it away. But the sacrificial altar was still there, which meant that the threat had not been completely eliminated. "Where is the sacrificial altar?" Chen Chongqing asked. The Demon Lord lightly waved his sleeve. Demon flames began to flow, gradually revealing the scene hidden within. Xuelao City was faintly discernible. The color of the demon flames in a certain place was even deeper, seeming like an unreal night, with no trace of light remaining. The sacrificial altar was there. Wang Pe silently committed this position to memory, then turned and left the demon palace. What about the demon commander and the second demon general? And where is Black Robe? Chen Chongqing looked at the demon lord and said, "Since we've already reached an agreement, why not let both sides shed less blood?" The demon lord's lips twitched, a self-deprecating smile on his face. "Have you still not seen that I'm all alone?" All alone was how the human emperor referred to himself, but it was not suitable for the demon lord. Just like those black monoliths on the slope, whether in size or shape, none of them were suitable to be used as gravestones. The several thousand black monoliths represented the several thousand high-level demons that had died on the battlefield. The closer one was to the summit, the more noble the status of the demon buried. Of course, other than that unlucky successor to the massive Gruel clan, the nobles of Xuelao City rarely died on the battlefield. The graveyard was filled with cries. These were noble ladies weeping over their dead sons and their lovers who had been chopped into pieces. There were also many nobles with faces covered in dust, their expressions lifeless as they stared at the night sky. They knew that the military advisor had made this graveyard into a sacrificial altar, sending news back to the Sacred Light continent. So why had no pillar of light descended to take them away? The human army had already killed its way into Xuelao City, so why were they still standing here? Shouts and the stampeding of hooves could be heard in the darkness, probably the human cavalry clearing out the resistance in the city. The nobles were very numb, not even showing any fear. It was like they had not heard those voices at all. Wang Pe stood at the summit, silently gazing at those weeping women and those nobles that were like walking corpses. His gaze moved across the graveyard, sensing the energy contained in those black monoliths. He confirmed that the demon lord had not lied and that this place was probably the sacrificial altar. But he still felt that there were some problems. This sacrificial altar was probably not strong enough to forcefully break through space, much less connect two distant continents together. Or was it just as the demon lord had said, that this sacrificial altar needed to be used in conjunction with the astral executioner to be fully effective? While Wang Pe was thinking about these questions, in a remote corner on the eastern side of the slope, a stooped gravedigger dressed in shabby clothes was just about to leave. The gravedigger had just dug out a new grave and placed a very ordinary high-level demon corpse in it. The gravedigger in the graveyard and the corpse in the grave were all very normal, but when one thought about how Xuelao City had just been breached, they all seemed extremely abnormal. A calm gaze fell on the gravedigger, watching as he slowly walked to the other side of the slope. Just when the gravedigger's figure was about to disappear into the line between the slope and the night sky, Wang Pe spoke. One more time. The gravedigger stopped. The wind ruffled his tattered clothes, and only now did one realize that it was not because he was stooped. He had always been very short. After some time, he finally turned around and said, "Okay." His voice was still hoarse and unpleasant to the ear. The rust on his helmet seemed particularly bewitching in the starlight. They had met for the first time on the plains in front of Mount Nuoralang, and for the second time in the swamp in front of Xuelao City. Tonight, in the graveyard, they would meet again, and it might also be their last meeting. The demon commander unsheathed her large blade from the wind, and walked towards Wangpo. The matter of writing letters was mentioned in the previous volume. 10 years ago, Tang Tang believed that Chen Chongqing wanted his help in writing a love letter. In addition, relatively rich in both material and mental energy, is actually not particularly appropriate here, but that was an evaluation I prepared for Tang 36 3 years ago when Heaven's Chosen was first published. I had been waiting to use it, but I never found a suitable opportunity. Now that the book is about to be finished, I'm worried that I won't be able to use it. Friends, we all need to be this kind of person. Chapter 132. The two blade glows, imbued with a boundlessly terrifying chi, fiercely collided and then never extinguished. They became the sharpest rays of light in the world, drawing out countless straight lines on the curtain of darkness, driving away countless dark clouds from the distance and obscuring countless stars. The winds howled, the grass snapped, and the black monoliths shattered, transforming into terrifying existences like arrows. The graveyard was filled with screams. Whether it was the noblewomen weeping for their sons or the numb nobles, they all came to their senses and fled in all directions, but it was hard to say how many of them would be able to leave alive. After an unknown period of time, the wind finally stopped. Countless mud and gravel fell like rain, and the two terrifying saber lights never lit up again. The clouds in the sky parted, allowing the starlight to illuminate the graveyard. Only then did one realize that the grass for several li around them had all sunk several feet. In the distance, the moon gradually rose over the horizon. The demon commander stood at the highest point of the grass slope. Her body was still short, but when contrasted against the full moon, she seemed enormous. Her rusted helmet had been broken in battle and had been carelessly thrown to the ground. Her hair was tied up in a ponytail, making her look rather comical. She looked like a little girl, but her expression was fierce and savage. Around her ponytail, a few strands of messy hair incessantly trembled in the wind. They looked like the withered branches of a jackdaw that had flown away. If one looked carefully, they would probably be able to see the wrinkles at the corners of her eyes and those white hairs. Wangpo stood below, an extremely thin wound on the left side of his neck from which blood seeped out. If the demon commander's blade had gone in an inch, his head would have been cut off like a ripe fruit. Wangpo was speechless as he gazed at that short figure on the top of the grass slope. Who could have imagined that such a powerful and terrifying demon commander was actually a woman? The demon commander turned to Wangpo and said, "In the future, you might be stronger than me, but right now, you are inferior." As she said this, her expression was cold and apathetic, devoid of emotion. This was just a statement. Wangpo replied, "Yes, there is still a gap between us." He did not conceal his respect for the number one expert of the demon race. The two clashes between Wangpo and the demon commander on Mount Nuoralang and in front of Xuelao City could be said to be the two most important points in this war. In these two encounters, the demon commander had always been one step ahead of him. Although it was an extremely thin line, it was like a heavenly moat that was difficult to cross. In their last encounter tonight, Wangpo had won because her injuries were far more severe than his. A few days ago, Xiao Zhang had used the frost god's spear to leave a bloody hole in her chest. Even tonight there was no sign of improvement. Wangpo said to the demon commander, "Senior, please tell me where Black Robe is." The demon commander sneered, "Why should I tell you?" Wangpo said, "This sacrificial altar is clearly a scam. Don't you hate Black Robe for bringing the demons to such a state?" The demon commander laughed maniacally and said, "Ha ha ha ha. You male animals always look down on us women. How would you know how powerful the military advisor is? She killed my elder brother whom I didn't dare to provoke, and played with the entire continent for hundreds of years. Why would I hate her? I will only worship her." Wangpo didn't know what to say. The demon commander turned to gaze at the distant moon. Just when Wangpo thought she was going to recite a poem, he suddenly heard her say something vulgar. "A bunch of idiots." The demon commander disdainfully said, "You insist on learning from the humans and using star radiance to replace sacred light. How could it be as useful as moonlight? What Southern Cross starry sword? Just the name alone is stupid, humph." A proud voice. The short figure scattered in front of the full moon. Golden blood rained down from the sky, covering the entire grass slope like flower petals. Shuelao City was faintly discernible in the demon flames. The location of the graveyard was extremely clear, as it was extremely dark. Suddenly, two extremely thin rays of light appeared in that dark area and then gradually faded away. Everyone turned to a certain place in Shuelao City and saw the golden light that illuminated the true darkness. When an expert on the level of the demon commander died, the world would naturally sense it. Everyone in the demon palace sensed it and fell silent. She was my aunt, a very extraordinary woman, yes, it's just that she wasn't very tall. The demon lord regretfully said to Nank, "Teacher and I originally hoped that you would one day become a second her, but you were too honest. You were actually tricked into entering the abyss by Imperial Father." Nank had followed Chen Chongsheng and the others into the demon palace, but she had said nothing. Her expression was very helpless, like a wounded little beast that couldn't find its home. The demon lord very quickly shook off his sorrow and calmly said to Chen Chongsheng, "The sacrificial altar has been destroyed and the agreement is complete. Can I leave now?" Everyone present knew that the leave in these words did not really mean leave, but had another meaning. Chen Chongsheng did not respond. He seriously said to the demon lord, "I don't know whether to admire you or sympathize with you." These words did not refer to leave or surrender, but to the demon lord's mental journey over the last few days. With the human army at the gates, what should the demons do? Silently accept, or go against the teachings of their ancestors and make one last mad attempt? The demon lord had probably been in great pain these last few days. "He's not in pain." A voice suddenly resounded through the demon palace, but it was impossible to tell where it had come from. Many years ago, Shuelao City was surrounded by little Jiexing's army. I suggested that we build a sacrificial altar and use the astral executioner to reopen the spatial path, but Xingshan Dong did not agree. His Majesty is just like his father, so he's not in pain. He might even feel a certain pleasure from martyrdom. The voice vanished for a while, then reappeared. I did not sense that God, so I do not understand their fear, just where their stubborn pursuit of freedom comes from. This voice was extremely pleasant to listen to, like spring water falling into a still pool, or like fingers plucking the strings of a zither. And that hand was assuredly beautiful. The black demon flames once more began to circulate, like a withered tree growing out of a swamp, gradually revealing a corner of a robe. The robe was also black. The demon flames rumored to be able to incinerate everything in the world had failed to ignite this robe. It was a black robe. He had been hiding in the abyss behind the demon flames. It was no wonder that the human armies had been unable to find any trace of him in Shuelao City. Gigi suddenly said, "They all say that your voice is very unpleasant. It seems to be a misrepresentation." That she was concerned about this problem at a time like this could only mean that her way of thinking was truly different. The Tang old master said, "This is her original voice." Seeing Black Robe, even his eyes seemed to change, the water in the well rippling. Black Robe paid them no attention. She turned to the demon lord and said, "Although Nank is my student, you have always treated me as your teacher, and I truly do feel a rare shred of pity for you. Alas, after struggling for so many days between the extermination of your clan and the teachings of your ancestors, you were still unwilling to listen to my opinion." The demon lord fell quiet for a while, then said, "That is because I love Sir. I do not wish for Sir to become even uglier." Everyone was stunned by these words, not knowing if he was speaking of that word, his love for his teacher, or the demon lord turned to Su Yorong and smiled. "I also love you." This was the most famous and most sensational affair between a man and a woman in the last few years. The only thing that could compare to the marriage contract that Chen Chongqing had taken out 10-some years ago at the Ivy Festival was probably the declaration that the Demon Lord had made to the entire continent when he was still a youth. I very much desire Su Yorong. Tonight, Su Yorong had been very quiet in the Demon Palace, and the Demon Lord had not said a single word to her. Many people believed that rumors were just rumors, that those words were not true. The invasion of the demon army in the first year of the new era had only been to conceal the weakness of the demon race. It had not really been because the Demon Lord wanted to marry Su Yorong. And then they heard these words. Chen Chongqing did not interrupt the Demon Lord, nor did he even get angry. In his view, this was a matter that was very natural. How could an extraordinary individual like the Demon Lord not like Yorong? But I love the military advisor even more, because the military advisor is a freak. The Demon Lord apologetically looked at Su Yorong and earnestly explained, I am also a freak. I feel that being with freaks gives me strength. Thank you. I thought that you would never say it. Black Robe's voice was still pleasant to listen to. It was not deliberately graceful, but it had its own moving aspects. The Demon Lord said, It's about to end, so I have to leave behind what I want to say. It's still not over. Black Robe looked at him with pity and said, Not even Xing Shandong knows my true thoughts, so how could you? The Demon Lord bitterly smiled. I've already given the astral executioner to them. That thing is in my hands. The Tang Old Master said to Black Robe, Back then, even if you wanted a star, the people of Luoyang would have been willing to pluck it for you. Alas, the present is no longer the past. The meaning of these words was clear. No matter what, he would not give the astral executioner to him. Black Robe mocked, At that time, I had no eyes for minor characters like you and Shang. The Tang Old Master sighed, Yes, at your side was the most dazzling person in the world. Black Robe sternly corrected, Not just at that time, even now, he is the most dazzling. The Tang Old Master said, But even if he comes back to life, he can't take that thing from me. He had hidden the astral executioner somewhere. Perhaps he had some special spatial magical artifact on him. The derision on Black Robe's lips deepened. Who said that I wanted the astral executioner? The Demon Lord replied, You once said to me that positions are relative, and our continent has always been moving through the sea of stars. These words naturally made Chen Chongqing recall Wang Zhice's notebook and the scenes he had calculated in the mausoleum of Book. The Demon Lord added, Even if you use the sacrificial altar to send the message, the sacred light continent will not be able to determine our position, so how can we open the path? The meaning of these words seemed complicated, but they were actually very simple and clear. If you were standing on the grassland and heard someone call out to you, you could only roughly determine which direction they were coming from, but you could not determine their exact position. Only if you maintained a connection with them, gradually narrowing down the range of errors through the constant exchange of information until you found them. Without the astral executioner, how could Black Robe establish a stable connection between the two continents that could be maintained for a period of time? Black Robe said, I said before, I don't need the astral executioner. The Demon Lord replied, This is impossible. All the records clearly state that this is the only way to open the spatial path. Black Robe said, I know of a method that can allow the sacred light continent to determine our position. The Demon Lord asked in surprise, What method? Black Robe turned to Chen Chongqing and said, I've been waiting for you for a very long time. Chapter 133. Deathly Silence. Black Robe stood on the stone steps, looking down on the crowd like a god looking down on all living beings. Some people had not understood the conversation just now, and even more did not understand Black Robe's final words. Sensing the oppressive atmosphere, Linghai Jiwang and the others guessed that the situation had reversed, that it might even have fallen under Black Robe's control. They nervously looked to Chen Chongqing. Chen Chongqing's face was rather pale. He already understood Black Robe's meaning and asked, "Sacred light?" Black Robe replied, "Correct." A gust of wind blew. The young Taoist boy fell into Yi Xiaoyan's bosom. Su Yorong's hand fell on Chen Chongqing's shoulder. Pure white wings had already sprouted. In the next moment, a line of fire would appear in the night sky. In the shortest amount of time, she would take Chen Chongqing as far away as possible. She also understood Black Robe's meaning. "There's no time." Black Robe took a step forward. Her robe stirred up dust, and one could faintly make out an invisible, transparent, and extremely thin thread. That thread extended from the dark demonic flames all the way to Chen Chongqing's front and tied onto his ankle. "You have exchanged letters with His Majesty for many years, so you should be well aware that the demon flames are heavenly fire, belonging to the same class as the sacred light, but even hotter, though it does not show on the surface." Black Robe looked at him and said, "In a little while, the demon flames will ignite the sacred light in your body." Before she finished speaking, a series of bangs resounded through the hall. It was the sound of ice crystals falling to the ground. Seeing the frost on the thread gradually recede, Gigi angrily said, "What the hell is this?" The crowd was also stunned. Not even the dragon breath of the Black Frost Dragon could extinguish it. Black Robe ignored her and said, "You might become a torch? I don't know, it's all deduced, but it should be a very beautiful scene." Chen Chongqing thought it over, then said, "I don't know if it's beautiful, but it should be very bright. It's not just because it's bright, but also because the sacred light in your body originates from that continent. The two are inexorably connected." Black Robe said, "His Majesty is right. The stars are moving, and the sacred light continent and the central continent are also moving. Separated by the vast sea of stars, it's very difficult to determine each other's position. If one were to forcefully open a passage, those descending lifeforms would easily get lost and then drift forever in the boundless space. However, as long as you ignite the sacred light in your body, no matter how far away you are, the sacred light continent will be able to locate us and open a path. In other words, you are an incomparably bright lighthouse." Lighthouse was supposed to be a very warm and comforting word, but now it seems so cold and despairing. "Looks like you've been setting this up for many years." Chen Chongqing looked down at his feet. The snowflakes gradually shattered, revealing the invisible line of fire. "Back then, I was the one who delivered Chen Xuanba's blood. Your birth was the result of a transaction, and I was one of the parties in this three-way transaction." Black Robe looked at the small carriage and said, "Your master is on the other side, but he has no idea what I want to do." Shang Xingzhou wanted to turn Chen Chongqing into an alluring poisonous fruit. Everyone wanted to eat him. The problem was that, if they ate him, they would be poisoned to death or stuffed to death. If the Tianhai Divine Empress had not eaten Chen Chongqing, Shang Xingzhou could have attempted to use Chen Chongqing to invite down a divine punishment to kill Tianhai. The so-called divine punishment was now presumably the pillar of light that the astral executioner had sent through the sea of stars. When the demon lord killed his father, he did not know that the most important function of this divine artifact was to connect the two continents. To put it another way, Chen Chongqing was another form of the astral executioner. Su Yorong suddenly asked, "You've never been to the sacred light continent, so how did you reach an agreement with them?" Black Robe replied, "I only offered a possibility. If the gods of the sacred light continent were truly omniscient and omnipotent, how could they have missed this chance?" Chen Chongqing asked, "Why do you so hate the human race?" It was no secret that the demon military advisor Black Robe was a human. Black Robe's answer was extremely simple, and extremely persuasive. The answer was his name. "Because I am Zhou Yuren. Zhou Yuren, the once most handsome man in the world. Zhou Dufu's younger brother. If those rumors were true, then he truly did have the right to hate the human race. She's also my wife." Wang Jitsa finally appeared, and then he revealed a shocking fact. Chen Chongqing did not appear surprised, as he had already guessed long ago. The Tang Old Master and Su Yorong had also known of this secret. Tang 36 was shocked. "Lord Wang, you like men?" Wang Jitsa replied, "She's a woman, her maiden name is Chen." Black Robe was actually a woman. Chen Chongqing was more concerned about the relationship between Black Robe, Zhou Dufu, and Wang Jitsa. It was no wonder that Black Robe had the soul pivot and was able to send Nank and those demon experts into the garden of Zhou. It was no wonder that even someone of Wang Jitsa's abilities would feel somewhat restrained in front of Black Robe. "Will you be happy if the angel army of the Sacred Light continent descends and our race is exterminated, or we become the servants of that god?" Wang Jitsa looked into Black Robe's eyes and very seriously asked. "Yes, the more miserable you are, the happier I am." Black Robe lifted her hood, revealing her true appearance. Her green face exuded a lifeless aura, but her features were still indescribably beautiful. She harshly said to Wang Jitsa, "On the day you killed Big Brother, I swore that I would exterminate the human race. Xing Shandong believed in my hatred for the human race, but he didn't know that in my plan, the demon race also had to be exterminated. He thought that I didn't know, and at the time, he also acted." It was a very simple statement, without any tearful accusation, but the hall seemed to grow much colder. If this was true, then there was no question that this was the most shameless murder in history. The divine domain experts of the human race, demon race, and demi-human race had all worked together, using all sorts of schemes and methods to finally succeed in killing this supreme expert under the starry sky. The demons and demi-humans were one thing, but the fact that the experts of the human race had participated in this murder was truly unforgivable. No matter how ruthless Zhou Dufu's personality was or how terrible his reputation was, no matter how many experts he had killed or heavily injured in his several centuries of cultivation, he was still the protector of the human race. If not for him, the demon race would have long ago taken Luoyang and conquered the entire continent, and the human race might have already been exterminated. In the end, he was heartlessly betrayed and then killed. The target of your vengeance should be Emperor Taizong, or perhaps Lord Wang, but not us. Chen Chongqing said to Black Robe, "Because we've never done anything to wrong you and your sister." Black Robe did not expect him to be so calm at a time like this. She mocked, "So what? Just let the entire world accompany him in death." After saying this, the invisible thread began to burn. No one could see the flames, but they could feel the heat. Chen Chongqing began to burn. To be more precise, it was the sacred light in his flesh that began to burn. These flames were very strange. Even his clothes could not be set aflame, but the light they emitted was extremely bright, imbued with a divine aura. At this time, Chen Chongqing did not seem like a torch, but more like a luminous pearl. Gigi's eyes brightened as she said, "Let me swallow him in one gulp." Su Yorong shook her head. After the sacred light was ignited by the demon flames, it underwent a miraculous transformation. The light it produced possessed the ability to penetrate material objects. Not even the Pope's divine robe or the dome of the demon hall could block out this strange light, so the dragon's body could not either. Chen Chongqing raised his head to the night sky, his expression grave. He could sense that the light was coming. Chapter 134. In the depths of the sea of stars, a speck of light appeared. This speck of light was extremely dim and small, probably in a very distant place. Chen Chongqing naturally thought of the countless stars he saw when he chose his fated star. It was as if there were thousands of lights in the sky. On the other side of this sea of stars was another sea of stars, and the speck of light seemed to be in that sea of stars. The speck of light was gradually growing brighter, indicating that the source of light was approaching the observer. The brighter the speck was, the closer the source of light was. There was another possibility. This was a beam of light aimed right at his eyes. Chen Chongqing felt an intense wariness, because the speck of light was changing from dark to bright too quickly. In the next moment, his sleeves began to rise while countless lights and shadows appeared in his eyes. He sensed that his fated star, which was like a little red fruit quietly floating in the sea of stars, suddenly moved. The beam of light had not yet reached the sea of stars, but it was already having an effect. Soon after, many people sensed that their fated stars were affected and began to rotate. The demon hall was filled with cries of alarm. The constellations are changing. The demon scholars looked at the vast sea of stars in the night sky like they were seeing the end of the world as they madly yelled. Was the sacred light continent beginning to invade? The faint killing intent in the night sky made everyone feel an intense unease. Only Black Robe calmly gazed at the night sky, a faint smile on her pale blue face. 10 years ago, in the snowy mountains, Chern Chongqing had seen a similar sight, but he still found it impossible to calm down. Tonight, this beam of light was coming at him. With a soft hum, like the bell of Sangarama Temple was ringing once more, the clouds over Shuilao City began to churn and then scatter. A beam of light fell on Chern Chongqing's body. This beam of light had traversed the distant sea of stars, but when it landed on the ground, it was only a few feet in radius. One could imagine how pure it was. Only God could do such a thing. This beam of light was imbued with the aura of destruction, desolate as if it had come from the end of the world. But Chern Chongqing was not destroyed like the demon lord. He stood in the beam of light, his body unharmed. In the next moment, he understood the reason. This beam of light required him to live. Stimulated by the beam of light, the sacred flame in his body burned even more fiercely, exuding boundless light and heat. It formed a small mountain of flame that swept into the night sky. The flame rose higher and higher, until it surpassed the demon hall and reached the night sky above Shuilao City. That pillar of light became even brighter, and where it came into contact with the flames, tens of thousands of tons of golden liquid splashed out. The golden liquid did not fall to the ground, but smeared into the night sky. The night sky there gradually became a smooth mirror surface, and it continued to expand until it occupied the entire sky of the demon palace. That pillar of light and the holy light within Chern Chongqing's body was the bridge that connected the two continents. What about the mirror? Could it be the materialization of the space crystal wall? The powerful pressure from the other world caused space to distort, especially the turbulence in the sky. The moon in the distance looked a little flat due to the distortion of space. Cries and shouts could be heard all over Shuilao City. The populace ran out of the city, and it was even more chaotic than when the human armies had broken into the city. Many deep cracks appeared on the ground. The Devil Hall had collapsed, and there were rocks floating in midair everywhere. The scene was extremely mystical. A protrusion appeared on the mirror. It gradually extended outwards, and the outline became clearer and clearer. It was actually a face. The surface of the mirror grew tighter and brighter, until it became transparent. That face was finally revealed. There was no emotion on that face. The bridge of the nose was high and the eyes deep. It could be called perfect. Archangel Wang Zhizi's expression finally changed somewhat as he muttered to himself as he gazed at that face. Very few people heard his mutterings. At this tense moment, there was no time to think about how he knew that this face belonged to an archangel. As that indifferent face approached the ground, the mirror in the night sky grew thinner and thinner, more and more transparent. The sight behind the mirror caused countless cries of alarm to ring out from the demon hall, as well as Black Robe's somewhat deranged laughter. On the other side was the endless darkness. Several hundred angels quietly floated in the air, their white wings striking. Everyone saw this sight, shocked and then terrified. Not everyone was afraid. To Xiao Zhang, these angels were like moth. To him, the source of his fear was that distant pressure, that gaze. There were no eyes, but it was clear that there was an existence that transcended matter observing the world they resided in. Was that God? Those angels seemed to have arrived in the night sky above Shuelao City, but in reality, they were still tens of millions of li from the central continent, perhaps even further. Based on the amount of time that had passed, all the intelligent beings of the central continent, whether they were humans, demons, or demi-humans, still had time to write their last words. The angel army descended with this pillar of light, fusing with the statues in the demon flames, and the world would welcome its destruction. "Does Master have any ideas?" Su Yorong asked Wang Jitsa. While everyone's gazes were focused on the pillar of light and Chen Chongxing, she had been paying attention to Wang Jitsa. She was confident that there was a reason why such a legendary figure had appeared in the demon palace today. She had noticed a detail. Wang Jitsa had easily recognized the face of an archangel, which made her even more confident. But Wang Jitsa's answer did not satisfy her. "I'm still thinking." Thinking could be described as observing, but it could also be described as waiting. Tang 36 was in no mood to think about those unspoken words as he stared at Chen Chongxing in the pillar of light. He sneered, "Then why did you come? To watch the show?" Su Yorong drew back her gaze and tilted her head to look at the mirror of light in the night sky. Chen Chongxing noticed her movements and thought to himself, "How cute. I haven't seen her like this in the last few years." Su Yorong thought it over and decided not to wait for Wang Jitsa. She said to Black Robe, "I can stop you." Black Robe's lips perked up as she jeered, "Is that so?" It was clear that she did not believe Su Yorong's words, just like how Xiao Zhang did not believe the Demon Lord's words, believing them to be empty threats. Chen Chongxing replied, "I can also do it, because it's a very simple method." Black Robe arched her brows. "Is that so? Then what are you prepared to do?" "Just kill me and everything will be fine." "Just kill him and everything will be fine," Chen Chongxing and Su Yorong said at the same time. They glanced at each other. Chen Chongxing smiled. Su Yorong did not smile. All was quiet, the only sound being the flowing demon flames. All gazes were on Chen Chongxing and Su Yorong. Black Robe looked at them, her eyes gradually turning cold. This was the answer, the only method. She had not expected Chen Chongxing and Su Yorong to think of it so quickly, and to be so calm. "Before Shang Xingzhou died, he said to me that if anything happened to you, he would kill you." Su Yorong calmly said to Chen Chongxing, "My apologies, I did not tell you about this matter. I have always liked Chun-Li and have always believed that the marvelous ability song should be used as the theme song for Coming Night. I have also seriously proposed this to the film company, but I do not know if it will succeed. I have also always liked Yorong, but because of the length of the novel, I rarely have the chance to show the beauty that she exists in my imagination. I have written a little of that in this chapter, and I am very happy. In addition, I suddenly realized that 8 years ago today was the day that The Spy began. Time really quickly disappears. To me, The Spy is a very special work. In terms of words, it cannot compare to Coming Night or Choosing Heaven, but it is my personal favorite story. If there are any friends who have not read it, I recommend that you read it. Chapter 135. It turned out that his master had already calculated. Chen Chongxing felt somewhat emotional. It was no wonder that in their last conversation, his master had said that even if Black Robe had any ideas, they would not succeed. As Chen Chongxing was sighing, Black Robe had a very nasty expression, and the others all had very complex emotions. Only the Demon Lord's gaze at Su Yorong grew more and more fervent and respectful. Did he really have to kill Chen Chongxing? Why had Shang Xingzhou given this mission to Su Yorong? Why? Black Robe asked. Are you not Dao companions? Chen Chongxing and Su Yorong truly were Dao companions, the most famous Dao companions of the continent. Everyone knew that they were in love. But Shang Xingzhou was confident that she could kill his lover, calm and determined. When Chen Chongxing discovered the answer and was unwilling to die, Su Yorong was the best executor. No one, not even Chen Chongxing, could have imagined that she would kill him. For Shang Xingzhou to calculate this and dare to use her as his executor was truly extraordinary. Of course, the most extraordinary was still Su Yorong. Do you still remember what we said outside White Emperor City 10 years ago? Su Yorong asked Chen Chongqing. Chen Chongqing had found the answer and calmly accepted it, so she naturally did not need to carry it out. Those two questions seemed to have been spoken at the same time, but she had come a little later. Chen Chongqing remembered what she had said. If your wife treated you extremely well, but had an extremely bad personality and was a great evil, what would you do? Biyang Hong had asked this question. Chen Chongqing's answer was that he would advise her, stop her from continuing her evil, and guard her for the rest of his life. In truth, this was rather similar to Wang Jitsa. Tang 36's answer was very simple. Why should he stop her? Wouldn't it be fun to be a great evil together? Su Yorong's answer was as fierce as the west wind outside the city. I will kill him, and then I will die with him. Chen Chongqing was not a great evil, but tonight's situation was truly rather similar to this question. Chen Chongqing knew what she meant by this and said very seriously, no. Su Yorong replied, just don't. If any other woman had said this word, it would have seemed like she was acting coquettishly or in a fit of pique. She truly was acting coquettishly and in a fit of pique, but because her expression was too calm, no one believed her. Chen Chongqing looked into her eyes and said, it's enough for me to die. Don't you die. Su Yorong said, I don't want to lie to you. If you die, how can you stop me? Chen Chongqing thought about it and said, that makes sense, then let's go together. No sorrow, no eagerness, no tears. Just like that, he spoke calmly of sharing life and death together. Yi Xiaoyan silently wept. Gigi was very angry. The crowd was filled with respect. The Pope and the Holy Maiden were indeed extraordinary people. Only two people had different reactions. They were both very intense. Tang 36 shouted angrily, you two are idiots. It's not the last moment yet, so why are you pretending to be a loving couple? Black Robe shouted sternly, come on. Kill each other. I don't believe you can really do it. I'm not an idiot. I'm not in a hurry to make a move. I'm just telling you that I can make your plan fail at any time. Su Yorong used a single sentence to answer their questions. She then turned to Wang Jitsa and said, you can think about it a little longer. Wang Jitsa kept thinking, observing, and waiting. He had yet to see that change, but to his surprise, he noticed a few problems. The spatial path connecting the two continents was clearly rather unstable. There was nothing wrong with the pillar of light from the sacred light continent. Even though he had been observing it for several centuries in Sangarama Temple, he had never seen such pure energy. The problem was with Chen Chongqing's body. The amount of sacred light burning within him seemed to be a little less. Of course, this was a good thing. Black Robe had also noticed this problem. She was very shocked because she could not understand. She was keenly aware of just how many sacrifices the foreign pope had made and how much sacred light had been poured into Chen Chongqing's fruit. As an individual, one could even say that the sacred light in his body was inexhaustible. Even though Chen Chongqing had suffered many injuries over the years, lost much sacred light, and consumed much of it, it was probably not even a 10,000th of the original amount. Why was it that the amount of sacred light in his body had decreased so much? Even the spatial path had become somewhat unstable? More and more people began to notice this problem. Many people also thought of the answer. Black Robe also thought of it. Chen Chongqing had refined many cinnabar pills over the years, bleeding a great deal every month. This blood was rich in the energy of sacred light, so it was called sacred blood by the believers. Black Robe had an abnormally nasty complexion. She took out a metal plate, closed her eyes, and began to calculate. Su Yorong also took out her faded star plate and began to calculate. The atmosphere grew even tenser. Several dozen gazes were constantly shifting between Black Robe and Su Yorong. In terms of calculation and deduction, these two women were unquestionably the strongest experts in the world. After a short while, Black Robe opened her eyes, a gratified smile on her lips. A few moments later, Su Yorong also opened her eyes and tiredly shook her head. Upon seeing this scene, the crowd knew the result. The spatial path truly is rather unstable, but it's enough to last until the angel army arrives. Black Robe stared into Su Yorong's eyes like an old witch staring at an apple. She giggled, "So you still have to kill him?" Tang 36 could not understand, nor could Xiao Zhang, Ling Haijiwang, and the others. If Chen Chongqing died, the spatial path would be severed, and Black Robe's lifelong wish would come to nothing. Shouldn't she be very nervous right now? Why did she seem to be more concerned about whether Su Yorong would kill Chen Chongqing? Only Su Yorong, Yi Xiaolian, and Jiji understood this problem. Perhaps Nank also vaguely understood because they were women. "You or me?" Su Yorong asked. "I'll do it myself," Chen Chongqing said. So. Countless sword whistles rang out. Countless white turbulence appeared in the night sky. 3,000 swords tore through the air, like swallows returning, quietly suspended in the surroundings, as if the storm had stopped. The South Stream Temple sword array was formed. Chen Chongqing stood inside. Just like so many battles in the past. But tonight, all the swords were turned around and pointed at him with their sharp tips. Chen Chongqing closed his eyes. The 3,000 swords vibrated and buzzed as if they were struggling. Ever since he had left the garden of Zhou's sword pool, his mind had become one with the storm of swords. This was the first time something like this had happened. The swords understood his intentions, but they were unwilling to obey. But in the end, this was his sword. So. 3,000 swords fell from the night sky and attacked Chen Chongqing like a storm. Tang 36's face was pale. Yi Xiaolian fiercely covered her mouth. The cinnabar mole between the little black dragon's eyebrows was incomparably red, and her vertical pupils were brimming with frenzied rage. Yet Su Yorong still did not look at him. She was still looking at Wang Jitze. Wang Jitze finally moved. His sleeve moved. But in the next moment, he did not raise his left hand. Instead, he let out a soft gasp. Everyone, including him, saw an inconceivable sight. When the swords flew around him, they suddenly stopped in midair. Time seemed to stop. Chapter 136. When time stopped, all things would stop. Even the several hundred angels on the other side of the crystal wall, slowly descending from the pillar of light, also stop. The rays of light pierced through their wings, transforming into countless thin threads in a beautiful sight. Chen Chongqing could be said to be the person who thought about death the most in the world. This was because before that night in the mausoleum of books, he had been living in the shadow of death at every moment. Although he had later obtained his freedom, when he needed to, he could very quickly return to the past and easily make a decision. When the 3,000 swords flew back from the night sky and were about to pierce through his body, he truly believed himself to be dead. On the spiritual plane, he was dead, but on the material plane, he was still alive. There was a very fine line between life and death, and on this line was a very profound state. It could be understood as superposition, but it could also be understood as neither. Entering this state was actually not difficult. Perhaps every life would enter this state once at the end of its life. The problem was that once a life entered this state, it could no longer return to the state of existence. It could only move forward, into the endless abyss or above the sea of stars. Only in the most extreme of circumstances would there be exceptions, like tonight. These swords were all Chen Chongqing's swords. They were connected to his mind, and could even be said to coexist with him. When Chen Chongqing entered this state, the swords naturally stopped. Thus, he and the storm of swords entered a relatively stable and extremely sensitive state. Even time had temporarily stopped. No one knew if he would die or live in the next moment. The still world became a painting, or rather, a curtain. Suddenly, Chen Chongqing opened his eyes. His eyes were so clean and bright, just like a mirror, reflecting all the details of the world, incomparably rich. In the abyss on the other side of the demon flames, on the pitch-black cliff, a verdant weed suddenly sprouted. Time was no longer still. The world once more began to come to life. Countless cries of alarm rose up, and then everything fell silent. Everyone sensed that something had happened to Chen Chongqing's body. The Tang old master, Wang Jitze, and the others had a more direct and accurate sense of this, because they had once had similar experiences. Black Robe's complexion became extremely unsightly. They could see the power of laws on Chen Chongqing's body. Chen Chongqing had not completely comprehended this law, much less surpassed it. However, that was the law of life and death. It belonged to the category of time. Comprehending 1% of it was enough. Enough to do what? Chen Chongqing looked at the night sky. 3,000 swords followed his line of sight, whistling through the air and entering the pillar of light. The diameter of the light pillar was only a few feet. After the 3,000 swords entered, it seemed to be a little crowded, looking like a carp moving forward in a narrow river. Under the scouring of the light pillar, the bodies of those swords trembled incessantly, but they did not stop. They courageously moved in the opposite direction with all their might, as if they were going to transform into dragons in the next moment. Sword and light constantly clashed, sending out countless shards of light. Like lava, they sprayed everywhere in the night sky, illuminating Xuelao City. Seeing this scene, everyone finally confirmed their conjecture. They were so shocked that they couldn't speak. An envious expression appeared on the demon lord's face. Tang 36 sat on the wheelchair and slapped his legs excitedly. He shouted happily, "Awesome! Awesome!" He was indeed awesome. In the blink of an eye, Chen Chongqing had stepped over the doorsill and entered the scenery. The landscape was sacred territory. Had there ever been an expert of the divine domain as young as him? How old had Chen Xuanba been when he broke into the divine? No one knew the exact answer, and no one cared about this question at this time. The first thing Chen Chongqing did upon stepping into the divine domain was to sever that pillar of light from the sacred light continent. Could he do it? You think this is enough? Too naive. If it were possible, why do you think Wang Jitze would still be standing? Black Robe stared at Chen Chongqing and shouted. Her voice had become extremely shrill, no longer as pleasant to listen to as before. Perhaps this was also a representation of her current mood. But her words did not seem to be wrong. The pillar of light was truly too powerful. The 3,000 swords strove forward, trembling more and more violently as if they could drop at any moment like withered leaves. Whether it was the Tang old master, Wang Jitze, Wang Po, or Xiao Zhang, none of them could help him. The other end of this pillar of light was in his body. To sever the pillar of light was to sever his connection to the sacred light continent. From a certain perspective, he was fighting against himself. Thus, it was only natural that this was his own battle. Chen Chongqing ignored Black Robe. He calmly and attentively stared at the pillar of light. His gaze passed over the swords and fell upon the crystalline spatial wall. The light grew brighter and brighter. He squinted and raised his left hand. There were 5 stone pearls on his wrist, each stone pearl a heavenly tome monolith. Su Yorong believed that he wanted to use the heavenly tome monoliths to meet the enemy and was prepared to give her 5 to him, but she realized that he had no such intentions. The 5 heavenly tome monoliths appeared in the demon hall. They did not form an array, nor did they isolate Chen Chongqing from the outside world. To be more precise, they were randomly placed in the positions of 4 heavenly tome monoliths. The position of the last heavenly tome monolith had clearly been carefully chosen. It was to his right. Wang Jitze was extremely familiar with this heavenly tome monolith, because it was the one he had placed in the Lingyan pavilion. He did not know what Chen Chongqing wanted to do. No one knew, not even Su Yorong. Gigi sensed the summons from her sea of consciousness and walked to Chen Chongqing's side, her face perplexed as to what was going on. After doing this, Chen Chongqing's right hand gripped the hilt of his sword. No one knew what Chen Chongqing was preparing to do, nor did anyone sense anything. Shockingly, the archangel on the other side of the transparent mirror of light seemed to sense an intense danger even though it was still millions of li away from the central continent. A vigilant expression appeared on its indifferent and unconscious face as it retreated. "Are you ready?" No one knew who Chen Chongqing was asking. From the heavenly tome monolith to his right, Luolua's somewhat perplexed voice suddenly came out. "Teacher, is that you? What's the matter?" Chen Chongqing replied, "It's nothing. It's fine as long as you're here." He unsheathed the stainless sword and slashed at the night sky. A dense sword intent rose up. The 3,000 swords roused themselves and howled once more, charging at the end of the pillar of light. They were unending and unending, transforming into a massive sword. This sword was truly incomparably massive. From the demon palace on the ground, it reached the night sky, piercing through the heavens and the earth. Chen Chongqing wanted to use this massive sword to sever this pillar of light. That indifferent and condescending feeling of being observed once more appeared in everyone's minds. Everyone could vaguely guess that God had probably opened his eyes once more, even though he might not have any. It seemed like Chen Chongqing's sword had already threatened the plan of the angel army's descent. An indescribable pressure came from a distant world, piercing through the crystal wall of space and falling upon the massive sword. The night sky resounded with an extremely unpleasant sound of friction and bending metal. Chen Chongqing's face was pale, but his eyes were even calmer. Gigi stared in a daze at him in the pillar of light, not knowing what she should do. Luolua's anxious voice came from the heavenly tome monolith. "Teacher! Teacher! Are you okay? Say something." The sounds of friction and bending metal gradually faded away. The massive sword was still holding up against the descending pillar of light. Chen Chongqing had held such a powerful sword. On the snowy plains, Su Li's heaven-shaking sword was only at this level. No matter how talented Chen Chongqing was in the path of the sword and could be considered a grandmaster, he was still young and had only just broken into the divine. How could he use such a powerful sword? No one could understand. Wang Jitze suddenly thought of an extremely ancient Taoist scripture and fell into deep thought. He gazed at the perplexed, anxious, and bewildered Gigi outside the pillar of light and quietly thought, "This is the azure dragon." Then he turned to the black heavenly tome monolith and thought, "This is the white tiger." Finally, he turned to Su Yorong and thought, "This is the phoenix." From their positions, she was rather far from Chen Chongqing, making it impossible to see anything special about her. The azure dragon to the left, the white tiger to the right, the phoenix in the heart. Wang Jitze's eyes brightened as he sighed. Formidable. A sword that even he admired was naturally formidable to the extreme. But this sword was still only able to enter a stalemate with the pillar of light from the sacred light continent. Two unimaginably powerful chis, separated by millions of li, were battling in space. You can't succeed. That's insubstantial light. How can you sever it? Black Robe stared at Chen Chongqing's face and shrieked, "Only if your true body can travel millions of li away and sever the source of the pillar of light." Sometimes, a prophecy could become a prophecy, but the process of calculation and deduction had been concealed. Black Robe was most skilled at calculation and deduction. When she said those words, it was highly likely that she had subconsciously feared that such a thing would happen, though not even she had sensed it. Thus, such a thing really did happen. A sword glow flitted through the night sky. 3 years ago, when I first wrote the book, I did not foresee the scene of the azure dragon on the left and the white tiger on the right. It was because I first wrote about Luoluo and then Gigi, so this possibility very naturally appeared. 2 years ago, a reader pointed it out, and then I've always been thinking about when I should have this large-scale oil painting appear before everyone's eyes. It's just that, after thinking it over, I ultimately chose the smallest stage and the most cautious display. It's fine to just laugh with everyone. After all, it's not the main plot. Chapter 137. This sword glow was extremely faint, like the trace left behind by a fallen leaf in the wind. If one did not stare closely, it would be impossible to notice. With a light swish, an extremely thin sword slash appeared in the night sky. This sword slash happened to be on the transparent mirror of light. A cut had been made on the wine sack, allowing wine to spill out. The golden liquid poured down like a waterfall toward the mirror of light, and the surface of the mirror began to visibly shrink. This meant that the spatial crystal wall was beginning to stabilize and that the path was disappearing. The pillar of light was still connecting the two worlds. The archangel floated into the distance, his thin lips parting as he soundlessly said something. With a crack, the distant pillar of light suddenly snapped in half. Like an iceberg, it slowly slid down the smooth surface. Half of the pillar of light fell into the void, gradually drifting away until it was finally annihilated. It was impossible to say if the archangel and the several dozen fastest angels would be able to survive the chaotic streams of space. The most miserable were the 200-some angels in the rear. The breaking of the pillar of light and its descent represented the dislocation of space. Even though the bodies of the angels possessed unimaginable toughness, they still found it difficult to resist the dislocation of space and were cut apart. Golden blood could be seen everywhere in the distant space, burning into golden flowers. The people on the ground could not hear what the angels were shouting, but they could clearly sense their pain from their twisted faces. A low, thunderous roar came from an unknown place. This low cry was brimming with dignity, anger, and coldness. A bolt of lightning pierced through the night sky and landed above the demon palace, accurately striking the massive sword. With a whoosh, the massive sword split apart, transforming into 3,000 swords that rained down like a torrential rain. Chen Chongqing raised the sheath. The 3,000 swords swiftly returned to the sheath, many of them still carrying remnants of white lightning. Chen Chongqing's face grew paler and paler, until finally, he vomited blood. Fortunately, there was no second bolt of lightning, and that low cry did not come again. The spatial path in the night sky had vanished, as had the pillar of light. Even God was not omnipotent. Everything fell silent. The golden mirror of light had been reduced to countless fragments that slowly drifted down like fireworks. Based on the speed at which those fragments of light drifted down, perhaps tonight, Xuelao City would be as bright as day. Apart from this, he could no longer see the remnants of the earlier battle. He even had a feeling that the Pillar of Light and the angel army were all fake. Everyone had the same dream. "Look, there are stars burning over there." Suddenly, a young child's voice rang out. The young Taoist boy in Yi Xiaolian's bosom pointed to a certain place in the night sky and shouted. Affected by the beam of light, the position of the star changed slightly, but it was still the position of the Southern Cross, so it could be seen very clearly. There were no stars burning. Wang Jitze and the Tang Old Master glanced at each other, understanding what the other was thinking. Shang Xingzhou's ability to recruit students was truly the best in the world. Wang Po and Xiao Zhang also felt it. Soon after, Chen Chongqing also felt it. In an extremely distant place, in the Sea of Stars on the other side of the Sea of Stars, stars were burning. A wispy sword intent was faintly discernible among those burning stars. Soon after, more and more people felt the sword intent, even though they could not see the burning stars. Separated by millions and millions of li, not even God could pass through, so how could the sword intent be so clearly transmitted here? Because the sword intent had always belonged to this place. The sacred light continent could sense the sacred light in Chen Chongqing's body for the same reason. This sword is very arrogant. No wonder everyone says that I'm very similar to him. Tang 36 beamed with delight, extremely pleased with himself. What's going on here? Why is the heaven-shrouding sword there? Black Robe looked up at the night sky, sensing that wispy sword intent in the distance. Her shrill voice seemed rather hysterical. You believe that you can calculate all life, calculate all the heavens and earth, but you did not calculate that His Holiness the Pope could actually break into the divine, nor did you calculate that someone had already gone to the starry sky many years ago. He might have been arrogantly living his days on the sacred light continent, or he might have been secretly observing the other party until just now, at the most crucial moment, when he unleashed that most crucial attack. The Tang Old Master looked at Black Robe and said, "And I spent money to raise that person." The crowd had already guessed at whose handiwork this sword intent was, but Black Robe's shouts and the Tang Old Master's words only confirmed their suspicions. Of course, it was Su Li. Wang Pa faintly smiled, saying nothing. Based on what the Tang Old Master had said, Su Li had been raised by the Tang clan. He had once worked as an accountant in Wenshui City for many years, so he could be counted as one. This was not the truth, at least not all of it. One only needed to think about the long-dead Tang's second master to know. The Tang Old Master knew that given Wang Po's personality, he would not deny it. Su Li would assuredly deny it, and he might even curse. Who asked him to not be here? Tang 36 felt his face heat up, wondering if he had stuffed too much mattress into the wheelchair. Even he felt his face heat up, so one could imagine just how shameless the Tang Old Master was in trying to ride on Black Robe's popularity and take credit. But at such an important moment in history, if these words were circulated, the Tang clan would probably not fall for the next 1,000 years. To the Tang Old Master, he naturally could not miss out on such a chance, as he was essentially a merchant. Other than failing to calculate that Chen Chongqing would break into the divine, Su Li's sword, and the Tang Old Master's shamelessness, Black Robe had also failed to calculate for one thing. Tonight, the spatial path was particularly unstable. The near annihilation of the angel army of the Sacred Light Continent was not because of Su Li's sword. No matter how strong Su Li's sword was, it could not have reached such a level. But his sword had succeeded in severing the pillar of light, causing space to distort. The majestic power of space was like time, difficult to resist, which was why those angels had died one after another. Based on her calculations, the spatial path should have been extremely sturdy. Even if Chen Chongqing broke into the divine and Su Li's sword came down from the heavens, it would still be impossible to break it. This was because the amount of sacred light in Chen Chongqing's body had greatly decreased. For 10 years, Chen Chongqing had incessantly used his blood to refine the cinnabar pill, even though he had consumed a vast amount of energy and had never advanced in his cultivation. Who would have thought that it would lead to such an outcome? It seemed that good people truly did have good karma. Many gazes fell on Chen Chongqing, all of them filled with respect. Chen Chongqing's gaze fell on the small carriage outside the crowd. "Master, did you already calculate these things? Then, did you already make that medicine, but you still had me constantly make cinnabar pills? Also, did you always want to kill me because of tonight's events?" Chen Chongqing knew that he might be overthinking things, that this sort of conjecture was just a glorification of the dead, but he still couldn't stop himself from thinking this way. In this way, he could more easily convince himself that it wasn't that his master didn't like him, but that there were some more important matters that he had to do. There were no answers to these questions, and no one knew what Shang Xingzhou was thinking. Just like at this moment, no one knew what Black Robe was thinking. All her plans had failed, her lifelong pursuit destroyed in a single night. No one would be able to accept this. She stood there, her despair turning into numbness long ago. She could even sense no life. Wang Jitsu walked up to her, took her hand and said, "Don't be like this in the future." After saying this, he nodded to the Tang Old Master and Chen Chongqing, and then led Black Robe out of the hall. Black Robe lowered her head, appearing especially obedient, like a naughty child being brought home by its parent. The demon hall was abnormally quiet. Linghai Jiwang and the others looked at Chen Chongqing. Chen Chongqing looked pensively at the stone step. The white paper on Xiao Zhang's face flapped, and it was hard to tell if he was gasping for breath or something else. Wang Po looked at the ground at his feet, seemingly lost in thought. The Tang old master's eyes were closed as if he had fallen asleep. Finally, a voice broke the silence. "Slow down." Tang 36 calmly asked Wang Jitsa, "Lord Wang, what is the meaning of this?" Chen Chongqing drew back his gaze. Xiao Zhang gave a strange cry. Wang Po raised his head. The Tang old master opened his eyes. They all looked to Wang Jitsa. This was his attitude. "In the end, she is my wife, and the human race has truly let down her brother and sister too much." Wang Jitsa said to the crowd, "I have already crippled her cultivation. In the future, I will take her to Sangarama Temple to cultivate and atone for her crimes. I will not allow her to wreak havoc in the human world." The Tang old master and Wang Po could naturally see that the moment Wang Jitsa had taken Black Robe's hand, Black Robe's cultivation had been crippled. They did not know what to do. Wang Jitsa's attitude was very clear and sincere, and his reason seemed very sufficient. More importantly, he was Wang Jitsa. Divine General He Ming, the other military officers, and even Taoist Siyuan and Archbishop Anlin all felt that this was feasible. No. Su Yorong's voice was very calm and firm. Tang 36 said, "The ones who owe this brother and sister are you, Emperor Taizong, and those people in the Lingyan Pavilion, but not us. We are still very young and have not done as many disgusting things as you have, so why should we bear the responsibility for your mistakes?" Jiji hid behind Chen Chongqing and said to Wang Jitsa, "This swindler whose mouth is full of lies can't be trusted. Who knows if he'll release his wife the moment he leaves the city?" Wang Jitsa ignored them. He only looked at Chen Chongqing and asked, "If you were in my position, what would you do?" Chen Chongqing finally spoke. "In White Emperor City, Senior Bi Yanghong once asked me a question. We even mentioned it a moment ago. Now that I think about it, this question is also very suitable for Sir." He continued, "We have already given the answer, but Sir pretended not to see it. Just now, Su Yorong had been prepared to kill him and then commit suicide. His answer was, 'If you really feel that you owe Zhou Dufu and his sister, then do it.'" The demon hall grew even quieter, a rather awkward silence. "The person I want to take away, who can remain?" Wang Jitsa's voice was still very calm, his tone still very gentle, but everyone felt a pressure. After several hundred years of wind and rain, none of these people besides the Tang old master had seen Wang Jitsa's former glory, but who dared to look down on him? There was no need for any reason, just his name was enough. He was Wang Jitsa. In Mount Han, he had appeared and the demon lord had retreated. Later on, in the snowy plains, he had appeared and the demon commander had remained silent. And there was no need to mention the scene just now. Even if Black Robe had been heavily injured by the Frost God's spear, even if her mind had been crippled, just who in the world could cripple Black Robe's cultivation with a single hand? No one present was a match for him. Su Yorong also knew that Wang Jitsa was holding back tonight, so she had not acted. She even believed that even if Chen Chongqing and Su Li had not been able to sever that spatial path, Wang Jitsa still had some other method. Wang Jitsa's strength was truly unfathomable. It was just as he had said. Just who could stay behind the person he wanted to take away? "I want to try." Wang Po walked onto the stage and said to Wang Jitsa, "Some years ago, Xuanyang City had experienced a storm. At the time, Wang Po was already a world-renowned expert, but he was still far weaker than he was now. At the time, for the sake of Su Li that he did not like, he dared to pull out his blade against Zhu Luo. And now? In that storm in Xuanyang City, there was another person present today." Chen Chongqing said, "I also want to try." As he spoke, a clear light illuminated the night hall. Several precious treasures rose into the night sky, exuding a divine and powerful chi. The star core, the gloom willow, the mountain and river diagram, the outer heaven seal, the falling star stone, the radiant pestle. The Li Palace's grand array was complete. The orthodoxy's divine staff once more appeared in Tang 36's hand. This world is formed from countless living beings. They are not cold stones that can be made into chess pieces, a part of the game you all play. He said to Wang Jitsa, to those lives that died because of your wife, your holiness should show a little more respect. Crippling their cultivation and imprisoning them in the monastery was not enough. The meaning of more respect was, a life for a life. Xiao Zhang hugged the frost god's spear and walked out. The Tang old master was expressionless. Chapter 138. A self-deprecating smile appeared on Wang Jitsa's lips, his eyes somewhat sorrowful. On the night that Xuelao City was breached, right after the crisis of the Sacred Light Continent's invasion was resolved, he had to face the encirclement of 4 human experts of the divine domain. From your point of view, this is a very sad thing. From my point of view, it is the same. Chen Chongqing said, I have read your notes and many books related to you. I really hope that I didn't see you tonight. That way, you will still be a legend in my heart. Wang Jitsa released Black Robe's hand and walked to the bottom of the step. He looked at the crowd and calmly said, My apologies. The tense atmosphere was suddenly interrupted by a voice. I say, can't you guys respect me a little? This is my home. The Demon Lord took 2 steps forward and said, Should I not be the main character of tonight's tragedy? Thinking of those letters, Tang 36 smiled and said, Tragedies often originate from awkwardness. You are still young, so you are not awkward. I take that as a compliment. The Demon Lord earnestly said to him, then turned to Black Robe and sincerely asked, Are you really prepared to leave with this man? Black Robe lowered her head slightly and a mournful smile appeared at the corners of her lips. Although her face was a strange green color, there was still a bewitching beauty to it. The Demon Lord's eyes began to blaze. I won't let you go. There was a sudden gust of wind, but Wang Jitsa had returned to the platform and gripped the Demon Lord's throat. A magical artifact fell at the Demon Lord's feet and shattered. Just now, he had aimed this demonic weapon at Black Robe, but before he could attack, he was restrained by Wang Jitsa. The Demon Lord's face was red and he was almost out of breath, but he was still laughing. Wang Jitsa slowly loosened his grip, his face turning pale. Black Robe fell to the ground, dead. A seemingly ordinary sword had pierced through her body, directly destroying her ethereal palace. The one holding the sword was a man in green. The blue-clothed man had been hiding in the Demon Lord's shadow this entire time. Only when he found the opportunity did he suddenly strike. Even with the Demon Lord's help, even with Wang Jitsa's attention focused on Wang Po's group, the blue-clothed man who could kill in front of Wang Jitsa was no ordinary assassin. He was the #1 assassin in the world, Lu Qing. Chen Chongqing and Wang Po looked at each other. The 3 people in the storm of Xuanyang City had all arrived. Black Robe died just like that. Wang Jitsa quietly stood in front of her, not knowing what he was thinking. In the end, he didn't make a move. He picked up Black Robe's corpse and walked out of the Devil Hall, quickly disappearing from sight. Tang 36 said to the Demon Lord, Thank you. The Demon Lord replied, I said before that I love her. If we can't be born on the same day, month, and year, we can at least die on the same day. Tang 36 said, I can't stand you. The Demon Lord smiled. There's no need to suffer in the future. Goodbye. Chen Chongqing said seriously, Take care. Tang 36 got off the wheelchair with some difficulty and said to him, Take care. Walking into the dark demon flames, the Demon Lord's body gradually faded into nothingness. Until the very last moment, there was still a smile on his face. It was a bit satisfied, a bit strange, unknown as to what it meant. It was snowing. Snowflakes fluttered everywhere in the night sky. The light fragments were still floating in the night sky like fireworks. Wang Jitsa hugged Black Robe and left Xuelao City. Half a city of fireworks, half a city of snow. On a snowy hill in the distance, a black goat watched them quietly. The night would eventually pass and the dawn would assuredly come. The rebel army had finally been routed and fled the capital. The North Pacifying Army and the Imperial Guards joined forces and began their pursuit. Xian Yuanpa handed command over to the human officers and remained in the Orthodox Academy. After a night of bitter battle, even though he was half a step from the divine, he had still suffered many injuries. This was especially the case when he had been surrounded by the experts of the Tianhai clan, where a large wound had been cut open on his left shoulder. At the time, blood had flowed out like a waterfall. Even he found it rather strange that he still did not feel dizzy. Of course, those experts of the Tianhai clan had all died to his metal sword. When he thought about how, many years ago, he had been crippled by Tianhaier at the Ivy Festival, Xian Yuanpa couldn't help but feel rather emotional. He knew that Tianhaier had died 3 years ago, supposedly from depression. As he walked through the Orthodox Academy, feeling the reverent gazes of the teachers and students, Xian Yuanpa felt rather uncomfortable. The teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy clearly treated him as a stranger. He was an old friend of the Orthodox Academy, and he even seemed to have a position. The depository was much quieter. That short wall had already been torn down, but the small building was still in its original state. Other than Su Moyu, no teacher or student could live there. Those rooms had been left for Zhishyo, Tang 36, Chen Chongxing, and him. There were many trees in front of the small building, and even more in the forest near the imperial palace. Xian Yuanpa felt nostalgic and also a little regretful. In the past, he would often knock into trees in that forest, but now he did not dare to do so. Now, a casual knock could snap even the thickest tree. Walking to the other side of the lake, Xian Yuanpa saw the kitchen that he was most familiar with. The kitchen had been destroyed by Wuqiong Bai, and this one had been repaired later, but there was no difference. Xian Yuanpa walked into the kitchen and looked at the pots and pans. When he thought about Chen Chongxing's request for less oil and less salt, he felt like his mouth was about to turn into a bird. Then he thought about the boiled blue lobster with white rice that he and Tang 36 had eaten many times, and he felt like his mouth was about to water. There was nothing to eat in the kitchen. It seemed that no one usually used it. Xian Yuanpa felt rather regretful. Before leaving, he silently gazed at the neat pile of firewood, then thrust his sword into it. Many years ago, when he was cooking in this place, he had done this out of habit. But today, he did not intend to take the sword away, because he wanted to learn from Tang 36 and Chen Chongxing. Several decades, or even several centuries later, a bullied new student of the Orthodox Academy would discover this sword in the pile of firewood. What sort of story would happen after that? Xian Yuanpa was filled with anticipation. Luoluo was also very interested in this matter and began to laugh. But the laughter quickly stopped. She was not in a very good mood. Last night had been very long. First, her martial uncle the emperor had turned into a son, and then her teacher had talked to her in Xuelao City, telling her not to move around recklessly. Just what had happened in Xuelao City? Since her martial uncle the emperor was so formidable, why had they come to the capital? Is there no meaning in what we're doing? She stood on the great banyan tree and seriously asked Xian Yuanpa. Xian Yuanpa stood under the tree, worried that Her Highness would fall. He said, "It's already been 10-some years since Her Highness has climbed this tree. Be careful, it's slippery." Luoluo made a face and jumped over a branch with familiarity. She walked to the front of the branch and gazed at the lake. The tree would grow, but its shape would not change too much. The principal said, "The process is more important than the goal." Then I think there is a meaning in us coming to the capital. Xian Yuanpa paused and said, "Actually, I don't understand the meaning of this sentence." "You are such a stupid bear," Luoluo said. Xian Yuanpo thought, if you weren't Her Highness but Tang 36, then I definitely wouldn't let you go. Luluo explained, teacher's meaning is very simple. We are all going to die. The goal has already been decided, so the process is obviously more important. Xian Yuanpo very seriously thought about it and said, it seems to be very reasonable. Luluo gazed at the lake and found a very fat koi, but she didn't know if it was the one from before. The fat koi gradually sank to the bottom of the lake. Suddenly, it waved its tail and began to happily swim back to the surface of the lake, creating many splashes. Luluo happily laughed. Many days later, Chen Chongqing's group returned to the capital. The scars of battle could still be seen on the street. There were many collapsed buildings. It was said that even the reception hall of the Divine General of the East's estate had collapsed. Fortunately, no one had been hurt. The restaurants in 100 Flowers Lane had suffered even more severe losses. After 2 rounds of autumn rain, smoke still rose from who knew where. Chen Chongqing did not first return to Li Palace, but went directly to the Orthodox Academy. They hadn't seen each other for a long time, but they missed each other very much. Just as Luoluo was about to throw herself into his embrace, she suddenly felt that there was something different about his body. She couldn't help but widen her eyes. Chen Chongqing nodded. Luoluo gave a soft cry and quickly covered her mouth, her eyes filled with surprise. Chen Chongqing smiled and rubbed her head. Luoluo tilted her head and squinted her eyes. She was like a little tiger, very cute. Chen Chongqing pulled back his hand. Luoluo was just about to continue her previous action of throwing herself into her teacher's embrace when she suddenly saw a smear of white clothing. She quickly restrained her smile and said seriously, "Greetings, teacher's wife." Su Yurong returned, Tang 36 also returned, Su Mou, Chu Wenbin, and the other teachers and students also returned. Of course, there would always be some people who would not return. Guan Feibai and Bai Kai did not go to the capital to meet with Go Hanshi, but instead returned to Mount Li. When the Mount Li disciples saw those urns of bone ash, they loudly wept and then got drunk for 3 days. Qi Jian was also very sad, because Senior Liang Banhu had died. But she did not drink because besides sadness, she was even more worried. Zhixiu did not return. He did not return to Mount Li, nor did he return to the Orthodox Academy. The wolf tribe of the steppe was also constantly searching for news of him. No one knew where he was, nor did they know if he was dead or alive. Chen Chongqing looked at the tightly shut door and said, "If he was able to come out of Zhou prison alive, there's no reason for him to just die like this." Tang 36 replied, "I also believe that he's still alive, because he still owes me a lot of money." Shuilao City welcomed a bitter winter. Snow the size of goose feathers incessantly descended from the sky. The supplies left behind by the deaths of the nobles in the city were rather plentiful, but the days outside the city were very difficult. The human-occupying army used strict laws to maintain law and order within the city, but they could not care so much outside the city. They could only wait until next spring to see if there would be any food reinforcement. In the northern part of the city was a grassy slope. It was so covered in thick snow that it was impossible to tell that this place had once been a graveyard. Only the occasional black monolith peeking out of the snow indicated that this place had once been used. The snow suddenly began to move, gradually bulging up. Then, the snow fell back, revealing a person. This person was dressed in tattered clothes. The skin that was exposed outside the clothes was a nauseating green color and exuded the thick stench of corpses. It was hard to tell if this was a corpse or a living person. If not for the fact that the weather was so cold, the stench of corpses would probably have traveled very far. The freak scooped up the snow and slowly washed his green body. Then, he found a black robe from the grave beneath the snow and draped it over his body. By raising the hood, he could block out the wind and snow as well as his vision. One could faintly see that the freak's eyes were extremely cold. What follows is an advertisement of 600 words. I earnestly request that you read to the end. In the future, I will never advertise as seriously as I did today. Furthermore, there is a very important matter that I would like to discuss with everyone. The opening message was clear. Choosing Heaven is about to be published. This time, I was the one who contacted the publisher. The publishing house is the People's Literature Publishing House. It is reliable. The cover is also absolutely elegant. It does not seek to be flashy, but it is definitely reliable. The most reliable thing is that this time, Choosing Heaven can finally be published in its entirety. Yes, you did not misunderstand. You no longer need to worry about not being able to buy the rest of the books after buying one or a few. Facepalm. There are 8 volumes in total. It will be released into the market in 2 batches. When the time comes, everyone can purchase it from major bookstores or online bookstores. Each book has about 400,000 words, so the price will naturally be slightly higher. There should be a certain possibility of a discount. If you have spare money and want to collect or read hardcover books, you might as well buy a set. The reason why I am so serious about promoting it is because this is a very good opportunity to collect. Every time I do not have a signed book for everyone, I am also very anxious. This time, I signed 2,000 copies. I am really exhausted. In the end, I almost forgot how to write the word fishy. Earlier, I said that I would like to discuss an important matter with everyone. It was because many readers bought the previous book and felt very sorry. I was too unreliable. I wanted to find a way to make up for it. It would not be good to let everyone buy it again. However, it is really difficult to get a refund, and there is not much practical possibility. In the end, I could only think of a way. I will donate the remuneration from the first 2 volumes in everyone's name to a very reliable charity organization like Shuntian Scholarship. It will be just like what we did on our WeChat official account in the past. I don't know if everyone thinks this is feasible. Of course, even if you think it is not feasible, I can only do this. Facepalm once again walked away. Please support the publication of Choosing Heaven. Thank you, everyone. Bow. Chapter 139. The freak that had crawled out of the graveyard was Black Robe. Her methods truly were extraordinary. She had managed to deceive everyone. Yes, this graveyard was not an altar used to communicate with the sacred light continent, but a method to divert the demon lord's attention. But this graveyard truly was an altar. Those nobles that had been used as sacrifices had not been offered to the sacred light continent, but to the abyss, to help her resurrect. This evil method was the greatest secret that had allowed her to live for so many years and be so difficult to kill or capture. In the past several hundred years, she had already done this twice. When she had established the spatial path to the sacred light continent, she had not forgotten to arrange her escape route. Thus, when Chen Chongqing broke into the divine and Su Li's sword came from the heavens, she had truly been disappointed and pained, but it was not enough to make her despair. As long as she was still alive, there was a chance to stage a comeback. At that time, she had already prepared herself to be killed by the human experts and only needed to be resurrected through the sacrificial altar. Who could have expected that Wang Jitsu was not planning to kill her, only to imprison her in Sangarama Temple, even willing to fall out with the human experts? This matter was truly rather ironic. Black Robe was not moved, only worried. The demon lord sensed her emotions, so he thought of a way to help Lu Qin kill her. In name, he wanted to live and die with her, but in reality, he did not. Even though the demon lord did not know what Black Robe wanted to do at the time. It could only be said that the demon lord truly loved her. The winds howled and the snow rustled. Her gaze fell on the snow and she saw the small amount of golden blood left in the snow. This was all the blood of the demon commander. The demon commander was her most trusted companion. The body she was currently using had been personally chosen by the demon commander and placed into this grave. Black Robe knew what the demon commander had encountered afterward. She was deeply sorry for this. Even in the end, the demon commander did not know that she had deceived her. She wanted to exterminate the demon race as well. Black Robe squatted down, dipped a hand in the discolored golden blood, brought it to her nose, sniffed it, and then kissed it. She stood up and walked up the slope. She had remained in the grave for many days, only daring to emerge when she was sure that the human army had relaxed its guard. In the past few days, she had eaten nothing but snow water and had to endure the torment of the bitter cold, so she was very weak now. Most importantly, she needed to cultivate again. She needed dozens of days to have the ability to protect herself. As for recovering to her peak, it would probably take dozens of years. She slowly walked to the top of the snowy slope and looked at the snowy plain in the distance. A smile appeared on her slightly rotten lip. Thinking of the cold and hunger she had endured these days, she felt that she was really a great avenger. In the snowfield, she had prepared many hiding places and food. As long as they could reach those places, they would be temporarily safe. Once she recovered her strength, she would return to Shuelao City. No, she would return directly to her long-awaited homeland in the south. She had already decided what she would do when the time came. The humans who had utterly defeated the demons would assuredly sink into internal strife. Whether it was between the north and the south, between the imperial court and the Li Palace, between the humans and the demi-humans, or even between those two martial brothers, new conflicts would arise. This was an inevitability of history, and it was also a weapon that she would use to her advantage. Vengeance would continue. Black Robe turned her head to Shuelao City and faintly sighed. This was how stories were usually written. They would have an open ending, waiting for a new chapter to appear many years later. But today's story was different. Black Robe prepared to walk down the slope and disappear into the vast snowy plain. At this moment, a patch of snow rose up and spread out in all directions. An extremely large demon stood up from the snow, its shadow falling on Black Robe's face. Black Robe only needed a glance to determine that this was a member of the massive Gruul clan. The problem was that no matter how she looked at it, this demon was already dead, a corpse. It was only because of the recent cold that it had not rotted, making it seem like a zombie. How could a zombie stand up from beneath the graveyard and then lunge at her? Black Robe's pupils constricted as she watched the approaching corpse. Just what sort of ghost is this? In the past, Black Robe only needed to wave her sleeve, or even glance, to turn this corpse into powder. But now, she had lost all her cultivation and was extremely weak. She simply did not have this ability and could not even dodge. Boom! The towering demon corpse pressed down on Black Robe's body, pressing her into the snowy ground. Whether by coincidence or design, there was a hard rock in the snow that happened to press against her neck. There was a light crack. Black Robe's neck snapped. Blood slowly flowed out, gradually dyeing the snow red. Her eyes were wide open as she stared at the gloomy sky, brimming with anger, despair, and a tinge of confusion. At this moment, she could not even blow away the snowflakes that were about to fall into her eyes, much less push away that heavy demon corpse. She could only helplessly wait for death to come. After a while, the heavy demon corpse flipped to the side. Accompanied by a tearing sound, a crack appeared on the chest and abdomen of the corpse, and a person slowly crawled out from inside. This person was dressed in very thin clothes and his body was covered in blood and dirt. He was extremely thin, his face pale, and he exuded a foul stench. Perhaps because he had used up the last of his strength, the person heavily gasped for breath as he lay motionless on the snow, right next to Black Robe. With some difficulty, Black Robe turned her head and asked, "Who are you?" The person's voice was very soft and hoarse, as it had been many days since he had drunk water. "I am Zhishio." Black Robe knew who Zhishio was and said nothing. A cold wind howled over the snowy slope. Cavalry rode by in the distance, but no one noticed that two people were quietly lying side by side at the top of the slope. If someone were to look down from the sky, they would perhaps find this scene rather beautiful, that they were lovers who had committed suicide for love. Regretfully, this was not the truth. After some time, Black Robe gave a faint sigh and asked, "How did you know?" She was naturally asking how Jishio had guessed that she would borrow the corpse in the graveyard to revive. Jishio replied, "I don't know what you want to do, but when I came to this graveyard, I just happened to see you here." At the time, the human army was on the verge of breaking through Shuelao City. At such a tense moment, the injured Black Robe was still in the mood to come to this graveyard, which meant that this graveyard was very important to her. Black Robe asked, "So you were waiting here for me to return?" Jishio replied, "Yes." Black Robe asked, "Could it be that you never thought that your theory might be wrong?" On that night in the Demon Hall, she had been killed by Lu Qing and her soul had borrowed the power of the sacrificial altar to escape, but she had not been in a hurry to leave. Instead, she had cautiously and carefully hidden herself in the graveyard for several dozen days. She could not think of anyone who could endure more than her. Moreover, there was no reason for Jishio to wait in the graveyard for so many days for a theory. Jishio replied, "I'm not needed anywhere else. I'm suited for picking up the loose ends and making up for the deficiencies." Black Robe asked, "What if I never appeared? Would you have waited forever? Until you finally became a real zombie?" Jishio replied, "I wouldn't. Once I'm sure that you won't return, I will naturally leave." Black Robe asked, "How can you be sure?" Jishio replied, "When hunting, the most important thing is not experience, but intuition." Black Robe asked, "And if your intuition is wrong?" Jishio replied, "Not every hunt will guarantee that I'll be able to catch prey. Next time will be fine." Black Robe thought it over, then said, "That's reasonable." The news of Jishio's reappearance quickly spread to the capital, and with it came an even more secretive piece of news. Only when he read the contents of the letter did Chen Chongqing realize that Black Robe had not died, but had died at Jishio's hands. This matter was not made public, because Jishio had clearly stated in the letter that he did not need this sort of honor. For the sake of all aspects, it was best to treat this episode as if it had never happened. Thus, Lu Qing still believed that Black Robe had died to his sword and felt that he no longer had any career to pursue. After confirming that the imperial court and the Li Palace did not need him to inquire about Chow Yunping, he calmly ended his career as an assassin under the witness of Su Yorong and An Lin, beginning his later years. Chen Chongqing went to the alley of the Northern Military Department and met with Prince Chen Lu. At this point, Prince Chen Lu naturally had no further need to conceal anything. His calmness was tinged with a tinge of arrogance, without the slightest awareness of being a prisoner. As he gazed at the somewhat unfamiliar face of this once familiar friend, Chen Chongqing finally understood why Tang 36 had never liked him. Prince Chen Lu was an extremely cool-headed and clear-headed person. He lived very clearly, knowing just what he wanted to pursue with his life. As a result, his desires appeared very open and aboveboard, and could also be understood as naked. In the end, what appeared was tranquility, and this was the kind of hypocrisy that Tang 36 loathed the most. Prince Chen Lu looked into Chen Chongqing's eyes and said, "In another history, perhaps I won in the end." Chen Chongqing replied, "Perhaps because I was not in that history. 4 years ago, a crabapple tree was replanted in that small courtyard in the alley of the Northern Military Department. 2 years ago, the restoration of the Mausoleum of Books was formally completed. The river embankments and bluestone paths that had been destroyed in the war 10 some years ago and the conflict 10 years ago had all been repaired. Under the careful work of skilled craftsmen, they did not give off a particularly new feeling, but rather seemed as if they had been repaired." As he gazed at the green forest, Wang Po thought of Sun Mei. He walked onto the divine path, and no one stopped him. The pavilion had already collapsed, but it had not been repaired. Han Qing was already dead, so there were no more mausoleum guardians. He walked to the peak and gazed at the wordless heavenly tome monolith in silence for a very long time. He turned around and gazed down at the capital, his gaze ultimately resting on the imperial palace. It was a cool autumn day. He turned and left. He never returned to the capital again. Chen Chongqing went to the imperial palace and told Yuan of Wang Po's departure. Yuan's expression did not change, but Divine General He Ming and the other ministers were clearly much more relaxed. After everyone had withdrawn, Yuan gave his own assessment of this matter, or perhaps Wang Po himself. His heart cherishes the common people, a true scholar of the state. Chen Chongqing's mood was rather heavy. Wang Po's departure had made him recall Shang Xingzhou's life. Master only wanted to do one thing in his life. If he were still alive, he would definitely be very happy, but perhaps he would also be very empty. Perhaps. Yuan did not finish speaking. Looking at the paper on the table, he shook his head and said, "The brush isn't right. Write it 100 times. The young Taoist boy, who had always been very resistant to the calligraphy lessons, looked pitifully at Chen Chongqing and called out, "Senior brother." In Xining Village's old temple, if Yuan and Chen Chongqing made a mistake in memorizing, they would assuredly be punished. Chen Chongqing had seen this sort of sight far too many times. He rubbed the young Taoist boy's head and smiled. "He is eldest brother, so I also have to listen to him," Yuan said. "Thus, to leave at a suitable time is an extremely beautiful thing." This was a reply to Chen Chongqing's question. Because it was rather sudden, Chen Chongqing froze for a moment before replying. "Yes." Chapter 140. Upon returning to the Li Palace, when they once more discussed Wang Po's departure, Su Yorong said something similar. "The country is dead. Wang Po gave up on the idea of seeking justice from the great Zhou dynasty and gave up on taking revenge on the Chen royal family. This was an extremely difficult thing to do. On a spiritual level, this was no different from sacrificing for the country." Chen Chongqing deeply agreed. Then he thought of the last words his senior said. "Leaving at the right time is a wonderful thing." Anyone could tell that this sentence was directed at Shang Xingzhou. Chen Chongqing didn't deny this point, but he always felt that this sentence was related to him. "I might be away for a while," he said hesitantly. Su Yorong asked, "Reason?" There were many reasons, such as what he said just now, and how his senior brother was so strict when teaching his junior brother calligraphy, which reminded him of his master. For example, many ministers and common people were praising him, saying that his senior brother was becoming more and more like Emperor Taizong. But he couldn't say these reasons out loud, because they were all his guesses. He didn't have any proof, and this kind of guesses was really irresponsible. He didn't say it, but Su Yorong knew. She said, "Maybe you think too much." "Yes." Chen Chongqing looked at her and said seriously, "But before Emperor Taizong did those things, he might not have been the Emperor Taizong that we know. He was the Prince of Qi that everyone praised. Perhaps killing his brothers and imprisoning his father was a choice, he had no other choice." Su Yorong said, "So?" Chen Chongqing said, "I don't want him to become the second Emperor Taizong, so I want to leave. If that's the only reason, I don't support it, because it's a completely passive excuse." Su Yorong said, "Being alive should be a collection of active actions." Chen Chongqing thought about it and said, "I also want to leave." Su Yorong asked again, "Reason?" Chen Chongqing said, "I want to know where I came from." From the age of 10, he had been living under the shadow of death. On that night in the Mausoleum of Books, the Tianhai Divine Empress had helped him defy the heavens and change his fate. Finally, he no longer had to consider the problem of death every day, and now had the right to consider other problems. Apart from the problem of life and death, the most important problems in life were those three. Who are you? Where are you from? Where are you going? In order to answer the third question, he had to first clarify the first two questions. The war with the demons was not over yet, but there was no need for him to do anything else. Shang Xingzhou and Black Robe said that he came from the Sacred Light Continent and that he wanted to go there to take a look. "I accept this reason," Su Yorong said, "but not for too long." Chen Chongqing was a little surprised and said, "You're not going with me?" Su Yorong said very seriously, "I was born in the capital." Chen Chongqing returned to Xining village. Even now, he was still thinking about his final conversation with Yorong, and then he remembered Tang 36's evaluation of Yorong in the plum garden many years ago. She was a woman that made one speechless. This answer made Chen Chongqing slightly relieved, but he forgot that Tang 36's evaluation of him was the same. He, the Pope, had suddenly left. Not only was he being irresponsible, he truly did leave others speechless. In the middle of winter, the flowering trees by the stream had already turned bald. There were no petals on the surface of the water, and there were no books in the old temple. Chen Chongqing slept in the old temple for a night. On the morning of the second day, he woke up at 5 in the morning. He washed his face with the stream water and walked in that direction. The fog grew thicker and thicker, becoming clouds at its thickest. In the clouds there were streams, vines, easily startled deer, and many shadowy beasts of unknown origin. These were all environments that he was very familiar with, but they did not cause his footsteps to pause until he reached the foot of that lonely peak. A unicorn appeared, its entire body pure white like a spiritual being. Chen Chongqing quietly stared at it. He knew that this unicorn had been waiting for him, had been waiting for many years. "You don't have to be with anyone. You're fine by yourself." Chen Chongqing looked at it, shook his head, smiled and said, "Go." The unicorn left rather reluctantly, turning its head to glance at him every 10 some steps. Chen Chongqing quietly watched it, not turning to leave. Only when it vanished into the thick clouds did he continue his journey. The lonely peak was shrouded in clouds year-round. Its surface was very moist, covered in moss and flowing water. But to an expert of the divine domain, these things were not difficult. They were like flat ground. 9 days ago, the sun sank into the cloud grave and did not appear again. On the 10th day, Chen Chongqing arrived at the lonely peak. Note, besides the sea of clouds, there was nothing here. It was especially cold and cheerless, giving him a feeling of loneliness. He sat on a rock at the peak, took out a fruit, and slowly and earnestly ate it. There were many things in the sheath, including food. Gigi had personally prepared it, and there was a lot of it. But he did not ask for anything, just a fruit. Just like how he had chosen to climb and not use any other method to reach the peak, this was probably the sense of ceremony he needed. After eating the fruit, he raised his head to look at the sky and found that it was right in front of him. He stretched out his hand and touched it. He found that the sky felt good to the touch. It was not as hard as he had imagined. It was very smooth and somewhat elastic, just like Yorong's face. He closed his eyes. The 3,000 swords whistled out, flying back and forth above the sea of clouds, seeming incomparably happy. They probably also knew that they were about to go to another world. Chen Chongqing reached the other side of the sky and then fell to the ground. It wasn't very painful, because the ground was covered with soft grass. This was a grassland with a circumference of several hundred zhang. Chen Chongqing turned his head and saw that the broken spatial crystal wall was slowly closing up. The color of the sky grew fainter and fainter until it was about to vanish. He could clearly see that the lonely peak that reached the sky of the central continent seemed to be facing him here. As it turned out, the two continents were not parallel, but perpendicular to each other. To this place, the central continent was like a wall. This grassland was truly very small. In just a few moments, he had walked out. Outside the grassland was a barren desert. The white sand formed a world like the White Sea. The light from the 9 suns was dazzling. Chen Chongqing casually chose a direction to walk in. Each step covered several li very quickly. He encountered the natives of this continent. More and more natives appeared. No one asked him about his origins, and no one dared to stop him. The natives looked at him in awe, parting like a tide until the sacrificial altar was revealed. The weather was truly hot, but the white-clothed monk sat on the sacrificial altar, allowing the sun to shine upon him. Back then, Chen Chongqing had followed the Tianhai Divine Empress's soul and met him by the stream at Xining village. "I'm about to die, and my qi and blood are exhausted, so I'm a little cold," the white-clothed monk explained to him. Chen Chongqing replied, "This place truly is a little cold." The white-clothed monk's cold was reasonable, but why did he also feel that this place was cold? After all, the 9 suns in the sky were all real. "Have you come to take us home?" the white-clothed monk asked. Upon hearing these words, the hundreds of thousands of people around the sacrificial altar knelt like a tide, sobbing as they prayed, "All for our home." Chen Chongqing silently gazed at these people. The monk said, "Your master once promised me. If you did not agree, I would wait for your junior brother to come and do this." Chen Chongqing replied, "If I can return, I will seriously consider this matter." The monk understood his meaning and asked, "You want to see the path you came from?" Chen Chongqing replied, "Yes." The monk said, "You should be clear that this place is not the sacred light continent." Chen Chongqing nodded. He had known a long time ago that this place was not the sacred light continent. If the sacred light continent was so close, the central continent would have long since been enslaved by that god. This place had once been the main continent of civilization, now the abandoned land. Those blazing, scorching rays of light that seemed to be brimming with energy were not true sacred light, but an illusion. This continent had already lost all its energy, and its vitality was constantly slipping away. With the passage of time, it was constantly declining. Back then, we sent 3 drops of royal uncle's blood through the sacrificial altar to the sacred light continent. The white-clothed monk continued, "And then there was you." The royal uncle he spoke of was Chen Xianba. Chen Chongqing was silent for a while, then asked, "The people of the sacred light continent can use the sacrificial altar to come here?" "This sacrificial altar can only transport non-living objects." The white-clothed monk shook his head. "Royal uncle's blood is not living, and the heaven-shrouding sword is also not a living object." Chen Chongqing replied, "But I am alive." The white-clothed monk asked, "Do you still not understand? When you were sent back, you were just a fruit." Chen Chongqing fell silent once more, then asked, "Then how was I born?" The white-clothed monk replied, "You were also pregnant for 10 months." Chen Chongqing understood. With a sliver of hope, he asked, "Is she still alive?" The white-clothed monk looked at him with some pity, just like he was looking at that young girl from 20-some years ago. "When you were born, she died." Chen Chongqing fell silent for a very long time, then said, "All of you are bad people." The "all of you" in this sentence referred to the white-clothed monk, Black Robe, and his master Shang Xingzhou. The sacred light continent has always wanted to use this sacrificial altar to open a spatial path. The white-clothed monk continued, "The closest they came to success was 10-some years ago. They were waiting for Shang Xingzhou to use you to activate the divine punishment, or perhaps to use my soul as a guide." Only now did Chen Chongqing understand why the divine empress, in her battle with the 3 saints, had cared the most about the soul of the monk by Xining village's stream. He stared into the white-clothed monk's eyes and said, "In this case, you are the worst one." After a moment of silence, the white-clothed monk said, "I have never been to the sacred light continent, but I once sensed the power of God. It is not something we can contend against." Chen Chongqing replied, "Even so, we cannot be the vanguard of the enemy." The white-clothed monk said, "If not for the sacred light continent using the sacrificial altar to replenish this place with energy, this continent would have been completely abandoned long ago." Chen Chongqing replied, "If not for the divine empress, the central continent would also have been abandoned." The white-clothed monk said, "I've always felt that the Tianhai divine empress did not die." Chen Chongqing recalled that back in Xining village, the divine empress had once said to this monk that she had her own legacy. Just what did the Tianhai divine empress's legacy refer to? Was it Yuran and Chen Chongxing or Su Yorong? The Forsaken Land was a desert. At the edge of the desert, several 100,000 li from the Green Province where the natives lived, there was a sea. There were no living creatures in this sea. It was like a dead sea. But no matter how desolate a world was, there would still be some extremely different life forms. Perhaps they were no longer life, but dead spirits. Massive waves rose on the surface of the sea and cold winds howled. A nether bone dragon that was more than 5 kilometers long was traversing through the wind and wave. This netherworld bone dragon did not want to flaunt its strength to the heavens and earth, nor did it want to express its despair to God. It had been forced into a corner. A squirrel squatted in the bone dragon's eye, just like a black dot. It gazed at the oncoming waves without the slightest fear. From time to time, it would let out happy cries. As it turned out, this netherworld bone dragon was playing with it. On the shore, a black goat calmly gazed at the sky, its thoughts inscrutable. I want to go to the Sacred Light Continent. I've never been to the Sacred Light Continent, nor can I go. How did Su Li get there? If my guess is correct, he probably went through Sangarama Temple. Chen Chongxing was very shocked by these words. He knew that Wang Jitsa and Taoist Wu had been in Sangarama Temple this entire time, probably attempting to restore the murals and continue the legacy of the Buddhist sect. Everyone believed that Sangarama Temple was assuredly in some remote mountain. Who could have imagined that Sangarama Temple was not in the central continent, but in the Forsaken Land? Upon entering Sangarama Temple, Taoist Wu was still painting on the wall. And then, he saw Wang Jitsa. Wang Jitsa's head was white, and he was lightly playing his flute. It was hard to tell who he was thinking of. Chen Chongxing was not apologetic, but he was respectful. In these past few years, Wang Jitsa had been guarding the most important path for the human race. If Sangarama Temple could lead to the Sacred Light Continent. There's a spatial crack here that's extremely unstable and needs to be repaired at all times. Wang Jitsa put down his flute and said, "This is precisely what Sir Wu is doing." Taoist Wu stared at the painting on the wall and sneered, "Back in the Li Palace, I don't even know who it was that gave me such a miserable beating. Now do you know how important I am?" Wang Jitsa replied, "I don't have too much time or energy to care about other things." Ever since he had learned that Wang Jitsa was still alive, there had been many bad evaluations of him. To ignore the affairs of the world was to be irresponsible. Chen Chongxing had had similar thoughts, but only today did he realize that these were all misunderstandings. Sangarama Temple was far too important. Compared to it, the struggles for power on the central continent, the battles to the death, were truly trivial matters. Since there's a spatial crack here, why didn't God break open a spatial path from here? Chen Chongxing asked. Wang Jitsa replied, because God could not guarantee that this spatial path would be one way. Chen Chongxing didn't understand what this meant. Wang Jitsa said, "You'll understand once you get there." Chen Chongxing asked, "Have Sir ever been there?" Wang Jitsa replied, "I'm still not ready to meet with them." Chen Chongxing thought this over, then asked, "Isn't it somewhat irresponsible for Su Li and I to do this?" Wang Jitsa replied, "Curiosity is the most beautiful trait we have as humans. It's worth taking risks, even giving up everything." Chen Chongxing asked, "How should I get there?" Wang Jitsa brought him to the mural. Many scenes were painted on the wall. Buildings with pointed roofs naturally exuded a divine aura. There were grasslands and white clouds, scattered huts, bustling markets, and even the seemingly sunny but actually sinister Colosseum. In terms of architectural style, they were very similar to Xuelao City. The murals also depicted many intelligent beings that were different from humans. Some of them were like craftsmen, like low-level demons, only much shorter. Some of them were extremely beautiful, like the elves that had taken refuge in the great western continent. Chen Chongxing became more and more entranced. Only when he heard the tolling of a bell did he wake up. As far as the eye could see, All he could see was a green grassland and white clouds drifting in the blue sky. The bell of a church came from up ahead, and a shout came from a square building. This language was very similar to the language of the demons. Chen Chongqing could understand it. It was probably a class. He had already come to the Sacred Light continent. Note: of course, it's rising evil. I hope that the bean can hurry back and continue writing web novels. Tomorrow is the last chapter, and there will be an epilogue. The mood is rather complex. Chapter 141. In the spring of the 33rd year of Xin, many things happened. First, the Emperor of the Great Zhou issued a decree, requesting that the Li Palace quickly elect a new pope. This matter caused a huge uproar. Very few people knew that after the decree was issued, the emperor sat on the throne in a daze for a very long time. Then, he had his junior brother write a letter to Holy Maiden Peak. The road of peace was also very lively. The Prince of Zhongshan, because the zhajiang noodles didn't taste right, was cursing the new cook into a pile of cow dung. Not far away, in the Shui estate, Shui Yejin, who had obtained second place in the grand examination, had left the mausoleum of books. The first thing he did was to be brought around by his mother to go on blind date. Every night, he would sigh and moan. Meanwhile, Zhou Tong's secret residence next to the Shui estate had been secretly taken over by Mou. Recently, after the court session ended, her favorite thing to do was to discuss with the Prince of Luyang how to make pickled radishes. It seemed like she really was pregnant. The former Lord Feng Guijun of Xuanyang City had remained in Shuilao City this entire time. It was said that he was studying opera singing. The fruits of the demon race's civilization were impolitely shared with the entire world by the great Zhou dynasty, and the most precious research notes of Grand Scholar Tungus were split between the imperial court and Mount Li. Up until now, Go Hanshi had not left the main peak for 3 years. Day and night, he was accompanied by those research notes. Qiushan Jun, on the other hand, only looked at them for 3 days. Then, ignoring his father's pleading, he left alone and went to the distant cold snowfield. By the time Guan Feibai learned of the news and rushed back from Wenshui, he could no longer see Chen Chongqing, nor did he have the chance to ask his eldest brother about the contents of the letter he had written to Liang Banhu. No one knew that Qiushan Jun had gone to the northern sea, where he had found mountain men Ichuan and Jinghua. He did not hide his intentions. He told the 2 hillmen that he planned to live by the North Sea for many years and wait for them to die of old age. Then, he would dissect and study their bodies with Grand Scholar Tunguz's notes, hoping to find a way to allow the demon race to continue reproducing. The 2 hillmen were not angry, nor did they think that he was a lunatic. They smiled and agreed to his request. The next morning, when Qiushan Jun saw Nank, he found out that she had already lived here for several years, but it seemed that her illness had not recovered, and had instead worsened. He smiled and said, "What a coincidence! I've recently learned a sword song. Do you want to listen?" Everything in the world was good except for Tang 36. No matter how arrogant he was in Wenshui City, he couldn't show off his abilities, and when he returned to the capital, he couldn't stand Zhixiu and Qi Jian's display of affection. The old master's body was healthy and it was clear that he wouldn't die for another few decades. His father's poison had already been completely cured, so he could at least live for another few hundred years. What could he do? He went to the Peach Blossom Mountain outside the city, entered the Peach Blossom Nunnery, and ordered a cup of peach blossom tea. He sat there for 3 autumns, but all along he did not receive any reply. Luluo didn't have a good life either. In spring, she was officially conferred the title of Crown Princess, but it did not affect her life much. Other than reading, practicing, and painting pear blossoms, the thing she did most often was to look at the sea of cloud. Her fingers subconsciously rubbed the stone with a lonely expression. Xian Yuanpa didn't continue to lead the army, nor did he follow Jin Yulu to farm. He became Luo Luo's bodyguard. As Luo Luo stood by the round window, staring at the sea of clouds in a daze, He was also staring at her in a daze. He knew that Her Highness would not remain here for too long, because Her Highness truly was bitterly cultivating. And on the day that she crossed that threshold, Her Highness would assuredly go to that world to find Chen Chongqing. In the twilight, the Tong River was as beautiful as a golden belt. Life in the small village was still peaceful and leisurely. The green bamboo tile toppled onto the mahjong table, eliciting cries of surprise. All of them. Su Yorong calmly gazed at the bamboo tile and suddenly said, "It feels pretty good." The woman and the other two mahjong players were just about to say a few words when they suddenly felt that something was wrong. She didn't seem to be talking about the mahjong tiles. The clouds that perpetually shrouded Holy Maiden Peak suddenly scattered. Countless rare and strange birds flew over from all over the continent as if on a pilgrimage. An autumn rain washed the Tong River, and every place in the world sensed it. Wang Pe stood under the wudong tree and gazed in the direction of South Stream Temple. He sighed, extraordinary. He was keenly aware that Su Yorong had not left with Chen Chongqing not because South Stream Temple had too many matters to attend to, or because the general situation of the world had yet to be settled. She was just not convinced. She wanted to leave on her own. Chen Chongqing had broken into the divine in Xuelao City for various reasons, and the process could not be repeated. In truth, Su Yorong had been the youngest to enter the divine domain. Before leaving, Su Yorong received a letter from the capital. The handwriting was very clean, somewhat similar to Chen Chongqing's, and also somewhat similar to Yuren's. The contents of the letter were a copy of Yuren's original words. "In 3 years, I will abdicate and bring him back to replace me." Someone had left this world even earlier than Su Yorong. She had also gone to find Chen Chongqing. The black-clothed girl walked out of the abyss and gazed at that majestic fortress of ice. She listened to the shouts coming from the walls, her face filled with confusion. If she had heard correctly, those people were shouting dragon riders, but weren't those lizards flying through the snowstorm? Chen Chongqing squatted by the stream and used a handkerchief to carefully wipe away the beads of water. Rising, he walked through the forest, over the fence, and toward that distant building. His hair had already been cut short and slightly curled. It was impossible to comb it into a Taoist bun, but it still looked very refreshing. The clothes he wore were immaculately clean, a stark contrast to those of the other magic apprentices. Perhaps it was for this reason that both the professors of the academy and the aunties on the ranches liked him. Chen Chongqing was currently an ordinary magic apprentice. In the Duchy of Greycastle, there were tens of thousands of magic apprentices like him. He was not worried that someone would discover his secret and know that he came from another world, even though this academy had many outstanding magi and even 2 archmages. In the academy, his performance was extremely ordinary. Whether it was the ripples of magic energy or the strength of his mental strength, there was nothing special about him. If he wanted to, those weak ripples of magic energy could vanish at any time and he would truly become an ordinary person. Even if God saw him, they would probably be unable to discover his true identity, because he had truly achieved concealment. The moment he arrived on the Sacred Light continent, he realized that the world here was filled with sacred light. This sacred light and the sacred light in his body had always been the same thing, so the two naturally blended together. This also meant that he had truly become one with the world. Yes, he was currently in the concealed divinity realm, the same realm that the Tianhai Divine Empress had reached. If other humans came to the Sacred Light continent, they would probably not receive such a terrifying boost in strength, but they would still become much stronger. The world was filled with energy. Several years ago, Su Li's ability to cleave open the spatial path with a single strike of his sword was presumably related to this. Although his sword had also been very formidable in the central continent, it had probably not reached this level of power. In the Forsaken Land, he had once wondered why God did not break open a spatial path from Sangarama Temple, since it was a spatial fissure. Wang Jitsa had told him that it was because God could not guarantee that this spatial path would be one way. Now he understood the reason. God was afraid. He was afraid that humans would come to the sacred light continent. Dusk fell on the window. Chen Chongqing walked to the window and gazed at the lawn on the perimeter of the academy. On the lawn, many teachers and students were on their way to eat dinner. Seeing him by the window, they all warmly greeted him. As he looked at these people, he suddenly felt a little reluctance. It was time to leave. In the last few years, he had been studying very earnestly in the academy. He had already grasped the history, magical knowledge, geography, and culture of the entire continent. Moreover, based on his calculations, Yorong should be coming soon. The world was so big that he was worried that she would not be able to find him. He had once inquired about Su Li's whereabouts, but he had come up empty-handed. He had not even heard of that cardinal he had coincidentally captured. The only person who could so perfectly conceal their whereabouts and information could only be that assassin leader. Of course, there was also the possibility that the church was deliberately sealing off information. He decided to go to the holy city and see the situation of the church. Most importantly, he was sure that Su Yorong would go to the holy city. Because the Pope was there. The Holy Emperor and the Pope were the most powerful people in the Sacred Light continent. No one could be sure who had the greatest authority. What was certain was that the Pope was the most powerful person in the Sacred Light continent. He was called the man closest to God. If one used the fastest carriage to travel from Greenbow County to the Holy City, it would take 1.5 months. It could be considered a very long journey. Many travelers were used to stopping at La Roselle Monastery to rest and replenish their food. Chen Chongqing gazed at the mashed potatoes, hard black bread, and fried fish on his plate and began to miss home like never before. After casually eating dinner, he returned to his room and carefully washed his face and rinsed his mouth. At 10 o'clock, he promptly went to bed and began to sleep, waiting to wake up at 5. Strangely, perhaps because the moon outside the window was too pale, or because the final cries of the autumn cicadas were too mournful, he did not fall asleep. Gazing at the frosty moon in front of his bed, he decided to pick up Yorong and accompany her for a stroll. Then he would go back and not wait for Luoluo and the others. He had made his decision, but he still could not calm down. He still could not sleep. Chen Chongqing did not wave his hand and kill all the autumn cicadas around the monastery, nor did he summon a dark cloud to block the moon. Instead, he put on a set of clothes and took a stroll outside the courtyard. Unknowingly, he had walked into the deepest part of the monastery. It was a stone fortress, and without any light, it seemed particularly sinister. To someone at the concealed divinity realm, there was no such thing as unknowingly. He had long since sensed that something was wrong, but he had not wanted to pay attention to it. Besides the Pope and a few other existences, there was no one in this world that could threaten him. Traps and ambushes were even more meaningless. There was an array beneath the stone fortress, and the weeds were filled with invisible threads of magic. Even experts at the level of an archbishop or a sacred knight could not pass through it. Chen Chongqing heard a cry for help. The cry for help came from the dungeon. Pushing aside the weeds, he could see a very small air vent. There were no lights in the dungeon, but he could clearly see the inside. The person locked in the dungeon wore a metal mask that had been welded shut and wore tattered clothes. When the pale moonlight fell on the metal mask, it seemed even more terrifying. Weeds grew in the cracks of the metal mask. It was unknown how many years this person had been locked up here. When the prisoner saw Chen Chongqing, he was ecstatic to the extreme, even going a little crazy. He constantly used his metal head to bang against the wall. Chen Chongqing calmly looked at him, waiting for him to calm down. "Teacher, save me." The man in the metal mask leaned against the air vent and pleaded with a trembling voice. Chen Chongqing asked, "Who are you?" The man in the metal mask said, "I am Augustus." Chen Chongqing asked, "You were waiting for me?" It was obvious that someone had done something to the monastery to purposely lead Chen Chongqing here. To be able to silently influence Chen Chongqing's judgment, it must be said that the person was at an unfathomable level. Chen Chongqing also smelled something familiar from this arrangement, so he was in a good mood and was willing to listen to what the man was going to say. A prophet who called himself a traveler once told me that as long as I waited patiently and sincerely prayed, you would come and take me as your student and save me. The man in the metal mask was obviously not lying. A traveler, only that person would do such a thing out of boredom. How did you know that person was me? Chen Chongqing asked. The man in the metal mask said with some excitement, completely ignoring the prohibitions set by that evil Richelieu, it must be you. Chen Chongqing remembered that the cardinal named Richelieu was a supporter of the Holy Emperor. Who are you? The man in the metal mask said, my name is indeed Augustus. I was once a holy knight, the twin brother of the Holy Emperor. I have been imprisoned here for many years. At the end, his voice once again trembled, seeming to be in great pain and full of resentment. His eyes obviously did not have these emotions, but were full of hope and nervousness, afraid that Chen Chongqing would leave like this. There were tears in his eyes. A very simple sentence could be used to deduce a very common palace story. Chen Chongqing thought for a moment and said, I want to go to the holy city, we may not be going the same way. The man in the metal mask said anxiously, it must be the same way. It must be the same way. Even if you want to go to hell, I will follow you without hesitation. Chen Chongqing said, what if the place I want to go to is the kingdom of God? End of text. Chapter 142. In the next moment, Chen Chongqing wondered if he had seen wrongly. That wolf tribe youth clearly hadn't turned his head. He was walking alone at the front of the crowd, without turning his head. How could he have seen Luo Luo? No one noticed the change in his emotions. Even Tang 36 and Xian Yuanpe, who were beside him, did so. Everyone's attention was focused on this perfect world. Only Luo Luo noticed his abnormality and quietly asked him a few questions. I keep having this feeling that something's wrong today. In the duels to come, you need to be careful. Chen Chongqing didn't mention the scene he had previously seen, nor did he hide his unease. He said, if there's any danger, leave immediately, or listen to my arrangements. Luo Luo wanted to participate in the grand examination without counting her results. Gohan Shi and the others had already faintly guessed at her goal. It was Chen Chongqing himself who hadn't thought of it. Hearing Chen Chongqing's cautious reminder, Luo Luo obviously wouldn't object, she said. I'll listen to my master's arrangements. The examinees followed the Li Palace clergyman into the distance, passing through a forest and arriving in front of a circular building. This circular building occupied an area of several hundred meters, with a height of over 10 meters. It was extremely grand. The building was constructed from stone. The doors and windows on the stone steps were tightly shut. The interior of the building couldn't be seen, only the black eaves on top could be seen. A cloud suddenly floated over from the azure skies. That cloud arrived upon the circular building and started drizzling. The rain pattered down. It wasn't particularly heavy, but in a short amount of time, it washed away all the dust that had accumulated on the eaves. The black eaves became even clearer, as if they were made from jade, shining with brilliance. The Tower of Purging Dust is the venue for this year's grand examination. The Li Palace clergyman turned around and said to the examinees, then began explaining the rules of the duels. Similar to passing through a sea of trees and crossing a green river, the final and most important segment of the grand examination, the rules were relatively simple and clear, very easy to understand. After passing through the martial trial, a total of 113 examinees qualified to participate in the duels. The first 15 examinees to pass through the River Chu would have a bye in the first round. The remaining 98 examinees would battle in pairs. The winner and the first 15 examinees would enter the next round, after which, they would once again battle in pairs, until the end. Note: As for how to determine the victor, that was even simpler. The two candidates would battle it out, and whoever was still standing would be the victor. The loser would naturally be eliminated, so when it came to the dueling phase, every round was very important. There was no way to salvage the situation. However, because the majority of examinees aimed to enter the 3 grades and obtain the right to enter the mausoleum of books, the first round was the most important. As long as one could pass the first round, the chances of entering the 3 grades would be more than half. As for how to choose which examinee to fight against, it was extremely simple, to the point that it gave people the feeling that, as the organizers of the grand examination, the Zhou dynasty and the orthodoxy were rather irresponsible, because according to the rules, they had actually given the right to choose to the examinees themselves. Apart from the first 15 examinees who had a bye in the first round, the first 49 examinees were allowed to choose their opponents from the last 49 examinees, and the examinees who were chosen were not allowed to refuse, otherwise, they would be deemed to have forfeited the examination, and their opponents would automatically advance to the next round. The examinees that have yet to be eliminated naturally weren't idiots. After hearing the Li Palace clergyman's introduction of the rules, they completely understood the meaning behind it. Sounds of discussion arose from within the crowd, but before the examinees could express any objections or raise any questions, the clear sound of a bell resounded from within the tower. The dueling phase of the grand examination had officially begun. The sound of the bell signaled the 16th examinee within the crowd, immediately became the focus of everyone's gazes. It was a student from Star Caesar Academy. He was tall, his expression solemn, his aura restrained, giving off a feeling of being low-key but not cowardly, very much like that of a soldier. If it was any other examinee, perhaps they wouldn't be able to adapt to this situation, or at least feel that it was a little sudden, but a soldier was most particular about strict obedience, following orders to the bell. Thus, that young examinee unhesitatingly walked out from the crowd and looked towards the examinees in the second half. His gaze slowly and calmly moved between the examinees. Facing his gaze, the examinees in the second half who were waiting to be chosen all had different expressions and reactions. Some had calm expressions, as if they didn't notice anything, some purposely sneered coldly, thinking that it was a provocation, some examinees lowered their heads or slightly turned around, avoiding eye contact with him, some examinees forced a smile. It was a little sad to watch. No one could have imagined that the opponent that this young examinee from Star Caesar Academy would choose was the disciple of the precipice of Violet Chi, who had doubted the examinee on the other side of the River Chu. The examinees couldn't suppress their complex emotions and began to discuss. It must be known that the precipice of Violet Chi was a branch of the longevity sect. This person definitely wasn't the weakest amongst the examinees present, yet he was chosen first. Why was this so? The disciple of the precipice of Violet Chi was startled. Only then did he realize that he had been chosen. He calmly walked out from the crowd, not feeling any sense of humiliation. Logically, the first to be chosen would naturally be the weakest, but he believed that the strength of his divine sense and the amount of true essence were just cold numbers or levels. There were more things that were tested in a duel. He was confident that he could defeat his opponent. The truth was as such. Apart from the first 15 examinees who had a bye in the first round, whose cultivation levels were slightly higher than the others, the remaining examinees' cultivation levels were relatively close. It was definitely not to say that the examinees at the front would definitely be able to defeat the examinees at the back. The examinees for the first round had already been decided. The Li Palace clergyman didn't give either side any time to rest and prepare, leading the two towards the Tower of Purging Dust, only to see a wooden door at the bottom of the circular building slowly opening. Behind the door was still a vast expanse of darkness, like an abyss, causing one's heart to palpitate. The clergyman indicated for the two to enter, then immediately closed the door. Looking at the tightly shut wooden door, the examinees were very surprised. Could it be that this year's grand examination didn't allow spectators? The Lee Palace clergyman looked at the crowd and expressionlessly said, "Due to a few special circumstances, this year's duels will be held behind closed doors." Hearing these words, the examinees started discussing amongst themselves. Some of them directly looked towards the group from Orthodox Academy, especially Chen Chongqing. They were probably suspecting that this arrangement by the Education Board had something to do with him. If it was a closed-door duel, they wouldn't be able to know the details of the duels, not mentioning any tricks. At least if Chen Chongqing were to lose, the Education Board's reputation would look a little better. Chen Chongqing obviously knew that it had nothing to do with him. He looked at the lone wolf tribe youth standing far away, silently thinking, the closed-door duel might have been his request. The wooden door to the Tower of Purging Dust was tightly shut. A remnant of rain fell from the edge of the black eaves. Drip, drip, drip. Without being able to see what was happening within the tower, they didn't know how the first round was progressing. They couldn't even hear anything. The atmosphere outside the tower became rather stifling. Perhaps it was because they couldn't see or hear. They could only imagine that the examinees became more and more nervous. Some examinees simply sat cross-legged on the floor, closing their eyes and meditating, no longer paying attention. Not long after, the door to the Tower of Purging Dust opened. The examinees all looked over, those examinees that had been sitting cross-legged on the floor, as if nothing could disturb them, also instantly opened their eyes. The one that walked out was the examinee from Star Caesar Academy. His face was slightly pale, the front of his uniform had been torn open, traces of blood could be faintly seen, but his expression was still calm and composed. The female examiner from the 13 divisions of Radiant Green came forward and began to treat this examinee. A clear light could be seen upon the stone steps. An aura that made everyone feel calm and comfortable enveloped the entire area. If it was under normal circumstances, to be able to see this female teacher's exquisite holy light of healing would definitely cause the examinees to gasp in admiration, but at this moment, their minds were all focused on the result of the duel. That disciple from the precipice of Violet Chi still hadn't come out. Qi Jian walked up to the Lee Palace clergyman and asked, "May I ask, teacher, where is our junior brother?" The Cliffs of the Longevity sect all spoke in unison, belonging to the same sect. Qi Jian, as a disciple of Li Shan's sword sect, asking about the situation of a disciple of the precipice of Violet Chi, was seen by many as a matter of course. Only Chen Chongqing, upon seeing this scene, felt a little puzzled. He didn't understand why the rather young Qi Jian, who was clearly unskilled in mundane matters, had come forward and not Gohan Sure. His seniors hadn't said anything. Why had Li Shan's junior brother been the first to speak? Chen Chongqing noticed that Gohan Shure's expression was as calm as usual. Guan Fei Bai and Liang Ban, who also didn't have any reaction, seemingly feeling that Qi Jian coming forward was normal. The Lee Palace clergyman said, "The loser cannot remain here. The person you asked about has already been sent out of the Education Palace. He should currently be receiving treatment in the Hall of Illustrious Persons. There is no need to worry." Qi Jian turned around and gave Gohan Shure a glance. Seeing that his senior didn't have any reaction, he retreated. The clergyman looked at the list in his hands, then looked towards the examinees and said, "Where is examinee number 17, Huo Guang?" Just as he finished speaking, a young scholar slowly walked out from the crowd. This scholar wore an ochre-colored robe. The space between his brows seemed to be covered by a layer of frost. His expression was indifferent and extremely arrogant. He had the right to be arrogant. Seeing this person appear, the expressions of the examinees in the latter half changed. They were even more nervous than when the student from Star Caesar Academy had chosen. This was because this young scholar came from Scholatry Manor. This scholar from Scholatry Manor was the one that had previously competed against Tang 36 in the Dallying Forest. The atmosphere of the field became even more tense. Very few examinees dared to look him in the eye. More of them were silently praying in their hearts that they wouldn't be chosen by him. According to the Lee Palace clergyman's arrangement, The examinees in the latter half all stood on the western side of the clown in front of the tower of purging dust. This scholar from Scholartree Manor's gaze swept across the field, looking towards a certain direction. It was the woodlands, a dense green forest that could block out the sun. It was a bit far from the tower, therefore, no examinees were standing there. Luo didn't like to bask in the sun, even if it was the fake sun from His Holiness Greenleaf World. Therefore, Chun Chong Xing brought everyone to stand there. The group from Orthodox Academy all stood by the woodlands. The gaze of that scholar from Scholartree Manor also fell upon the woodlands, upon the group from Orthodox Academy. Chun Chong Xing's expression was calm. Xian Yuanpa didn't respond. He was staring blankly at an ant at his feet. Luo was fanning Chun Chong Xing with a handkerchief. Only Tang 36 had any reaction. He slightly raised his eyebrows, then raised his head, looking at that scholar from Scholartree Manor. His expression was indescribably proud, as if to say, "Come and choose me, come and choose me." Note: 113 examinees, how to battle and how to successfully make up the numbers. I've calculated for this many times. It took at least half an hour. My dear mother, ******. My elementary school mathematics really wasn't taught by a PE teacher, it was taught by my mum. My mum is an elementary school mathematics teacher. Also, today's writing is a bit slow. The next chapter should be out before 1:30. Chapter 143. Looking at the young scholar from Scholartree Manor, Tang 36's eyebrows were raised high and his chin was raised even higher. The feeling of "come to choose me" and "come to beat me" was similar. In short, he gave off an extremely arrogant and smug feeling, a feeling that he deserved a beating, even if his face was so handsome. In reality, the more handsome his face was, the more he deserved a beating in the eyes of those of the same sex. All the examinees followed the scholar's gaze and understood the hidden meaning behind Tang 36's expression. "If you don't choose me, then you're my grandson." The scholar from Scholartree Manor had never thought of choosing him. No matter what, Tang 36 was a young expert ranked 32nd upon the proclamation of Azure Clouds. To choose him as an opponent due to a conflict of emotions? Even if he won with difficulty, it would definitely affect the following matches and affect his final result in the grand examination. Such a decision was not made by a wise person. Scholartree Manor cultivated the mind, so he obviously wouldn't do such a thing. His gaze deliberately fell upon the woodlands where those from Orthodox Academy were, just to make them nervous. He didn't think that Tang 36's reaction would be so arrogant and provocative. His expression immediately became unsightly, thinking back to the previous fight in the Sea of Trees, Tang 36's harsh words. His blood surged and he could no longer control his emotions, raising his right arm to point at Tang 36. At this moment, a hand reached out from the side and pressed down on the scholar's hand. The one who stopped him was a fellow student. That young scholar had a childish look on his face. Amongst the four from Scholartree Manor that had come to participate in the grand examination, he seemed to be the youngest, but his status was vaguely the highest. Previously, on the northern shore of the River Chu, it was also him who stopped his fellow student from demanding justice from Orthodox Academy. The scholar from Scholartree Manor named Huguang looked at Tang 36 and sneered. He randomly picked someone from the latter half of the examinees and walked towards the tower. Seeing this scene, Chun Chong Xing was a little surprised, thinking to himself that the South was indeed different. In places like Li Shan's sword sect and Scholartree Manor, it was actually the youngest disciple who had the most power. The second match ended even faster than the first. Not too much time had passed. It was as if the scholar from Scholartree Manor called Huguang had only walked into the tower to take a look, then pushed open the door and came out again. His opponent did not come out, so naturally he had lost and was escorted out of the education palace by the priests. Previously, when they crossed the River Chu, the four scholars from Scholartree Manor crossed the river at roughly the same time. After Huguang, the next ones to appear were naturally his three fellow students. Without any mishaps, each match ended faster than the last. They had obtained victory in the first round and entered the next round. Scolatry Manor, so it turns out they really are this strong. Suemou sighed as he walked to the edge of the forest. Tang 36 looked at the 4 scholars from Scolatry Manor, and his expression gradually became serious. He didn't like these scholars from Scolatry Manor. In his opinion, the scholars from Scolatry Manor valued rules and wisdom too much. In reality, they liked to snitch and play tricks. However, he had to admit that these scholars from Scolatry Manor were really strong. That young scholar is called Zhong Hui, ranked 9th upon the proclamation of Azure Clouds. He knew that Suemou was well aware of this, but Chen Chongqing didn't seem to have any impression of him. He said in a low voice, "Those 2 scholars from Scolatry Manor are also on the proclamation of Azure Clouds, both entering the top 100. That fellow called Huoguang isn't on the proclamation of Azure Clouds, but his strength is stronger than those 2. It's possible that he's been hiding in Scolatry Manor all these years, preparing to amaze the world with a single brilliant feat. 3 people on the proclamation of Azure Clouds in addition to a hidden young expert. Scolatry Manor's strength was indeed as unfathomable as people had guessed. At this moment, if one were to compare schools and sects, apart from the high and mighty Lishan Sword Sect, Scolatry Manor, Heavenly Academy and Orthodox Academy should be the 3 strongest. However, what was interesting was that the 4 from Orthodox Academy were currently in the latter half, and could only wait to be chosen. The academic exam required thinking and writing, the martial exam required using divine sense to scout and prepare, and the dueling exam only required choosing an opponent and then making a move. Not to mention, in a battle, victory or defeat was always decided within a few moves. Even if the 2 combatants were at a similar level of cultivation, it wouldn't take too long to determine the victor. The wooden door of the tower opened and closed and opened. The oil within the door seemed to have decreased due to the frequency of its opening and closing, gradually emitting a squeaking sound. Amidst these sounds, the first round of matches quickly progressed, and very quickly, dozens of matches were concluded. Some of them were won by the examinees at the front, but the number of victories by examinees at the back was not small as well. The examinees at the front had the initiative to choose. They could do their best to choose an opponent that they felt was weak, but for the sake of the grand examination, the young cultivators of this continent had prepared for an entire year. Previous information or impressions were no longer accurate. It was difficult to determine who was strong and who was weak, and the outcome was naturally difficult to predict. A short while ago, the proclamation of Azure Clouds had been updated, thus it became the most reliable source of information. Firstly, the proclamation was sufficiently authoritative, the judgment of the Council of Divine Ordinance was trustworthy. Secondly, the proclamation had just been updated. The strength of those on the proclamation shouldn't have changed too much. Situations like Su Yurong and Luo Luo wouldn't often occur. Therefore, no examinees chose Suemou as their opponent. He was ranked 33 on the proclamation of Azure Clouds. Apart from the top 15 examinees and a few from Scolatry Manor, amongst the remaining examinees, his strength could easily be ranked in the top 5. As for Orthodox Academy, no one paid any attention to him, only a madman would choose Luo Luo. As for Tang 36, even the scholar from Scolatry Manor didn't choose him, who would be stupid enough to send him up? Even Xian Yuan Po was not chosen as an opponent, even though he was at the bottom of the proclamation of Azure Clouds, but he had still entered the proclamation of Azure Cloud. Furthermore, the cultivation of the demonic race was completely different from that of humans. Their talent was hard to predict. To be on the safe side, some of the examinees in the first half of the proclamation of Azure Clouds would rather choose an opponent ranked higher than him. What was interesting, or perhaps strange, was that even Chen Chongqing, who hadn't entered the proclamation, wasn't chosen by anyone. All of the examinees clearly knew that when the proclamation was updated, Chen Chongqing had yet to complete his purification. Even if he had a fortuitous encounter afterwards and was lucky enough to complete his purification, cultivating for a short period of time was definitely not enough to allow his strength to increase by leaps and bounds. He should be the weakest amongst those present, but no one dared to choose him. The area outside of the tower was very lively, but the woodlands were very deserted. Luo Luo hugged Chen Chongqing's arm and leaned against his body, about to fall asleep. Xian Yuan yawned. His mouth was wide enough to fit a deer's leg. It was unknown what Tang 36 was saying to Su Mou, but Su Mou's face was filled with shock. The youths of Orthodox Academy were truly bored. Fortunately, according to the rules, the boring wait would eventually come to an end. The wooden door of the tower creaked open once again. The young girl from Tiger Stream Temple walked out. Her small face was filled with tears of joy from her victory. She threw herself into her senior's embrace. Just as she was about to act coquettishly, she noticed that the surrounding atmosphere was a little strange. She subconsciously wiped away her tears and looked towards the arena. An examinee walked towards the arena with heavy steps. He looked towards the west side of the stone plaza in front of the tower, towards the woodlands. His face became a little pale. There were only 5 people left on that side. Now, he wanted to choose one of these 5 as his opponent. Who knows when the next chapter will be written? It'll be finished before bedtime anyways. If there's anyone who's still waiting to see the update at this time, what I want to say is, let's first eat some sweet night. I'll go make some Lao Tan pickled cabbage noodles, spicy. What about you? Chapter 144. The examinee suddenly turned around, looking at the Li Palace clergyman. He pointed at the 4 examinees behind him and asked, "Can I challenge them?" Those 4 examinees were the last 4 out of the 64 examinees that had passed through the River Chu. Upon hearing that the examinee wanted to challenge them, not only did they not become angry, they instead revealed expressions of joy and said yes. The Li Palace clergyman said indifferently, "Do you think the grand examination is child's play? I made it clear earlier, the first 49 examinees can choose their opponent from the last 49, the winner will advance to the next round of the dueling trial. Did you not understand?" Silence. The examinee was silent for a long time, then suddenly said, "This isn't fair." He looked towards the examinees that were originally at the back but had won, angrily saying in a loud voice, "My results in the martial trial were better than theirs. I crossed the river before them. What right do I have to challenge stronger opponents now? The grand examination is obviously not child's play, but don't you think this rule is unreasonable?" The Li Palace clergyman's face remained expressionless. He indifferently said, "This can only mean that your luck is bad. Who asked you to cross the river between rank 60 and 64? Hearing these words, the crowd burst into an uproar. They all thought to themselves, "Is luck also part of the grand examination's assessment?" The clergyman's words were completely unreasonable. The clergyman knew what these young cultivators were thinking. He looked at the crowd with a slightly cold expression and said, "How can there be absolute fairness in this world? On the battlefield, you're tasked with bringing up the rear and intercepting the strongest demon experts. Just because you think this isn't fair, you can refuse the order? To survive, luck will always be the most important factor." The examinees remained silent. They still didn't agree with this argument, but didn't know how to refute it. The examinee could do nothing but accept this sorrowful reality. The only consolation was that he at least had more options than the last 4 examinees. He turned around and looked towards the woodlands once again, his gaze moving back and forth between Chen Chongqing and the others, unable to decide who to choose. The area in front of the tower was silent, even the air seemed to have become chilly. Dozens of examinees nervously waited for his final decision. In contrast, those fellows by the woodlands who were supposed to be the most nervous and could only passively wait to be chosen, were rather calm and composed. For some reason, the Li Palace clergyman didn't urge the examinee like he had before. Perhaps he and the other examiners were also curious about the examinee's choice. Finally, that examinee made up his mind. He pointed at Xianyuan Po and said, "You." The silence in the field was broken, and a buzz of discussion broke out. If it was any other examinee, they wouldn't know who to choose as their opponent. Xianyuan Po stared blankly for a moment before coming back to his senses. He said to Luoluo, "Teacher, I'm going now." On the side, Tang 36 raised his eyebrows and said, "The word gone is inauspicious. Change it." Xianyuan Po ignored him, bowed to Chen Chongxing and said, "I'm leaving." Logically speaking, he should call Chen Chongxing Grandmaster, but although he admired and even respected Chen Chongxing, he still couldn't call Chen Chongxing by that title. After being ignored, Tang 36 wasn't angry. He reached his hand up high and patted the Yao boy's broad shoulder. He said in a low voice, "Do you still remember what we talked about last night?" Xianyuan Po grunted and said, "Don't give your opponent any chance to think. Use the fastest speed to close the distance between you and him, and then directly knock him down." Having said that, he suddenly noticed that Tang 36's expression was a bit off. He then noticed that Luoluo and Chen Chongxing's expressions had also changed. Even Su Mo Yu had his mouth agape, appearing extremely shocked. "What's wrong?" He blankly scratched the back of his head and asked, "Did I say something wrong?" Tang 36 sighed, patting his shoulder again and said, "You didn't, it's just that your voice was a bit too loud." It was at this moment that Xianyuan Po noticed that the area before the tower was completely silent. Everyone was looking at him, the expressions on their faces were very interesting. His voice was loud and clear. His reply to Tang 36's question was very natural. He didn't even think to control his volume. Thus, he told everyone of the battle strategy that Orthodox Academy had prepared for him, including his opponent. But then, would this battle strategy still be effective? Chen Chongxing shook his head. He placed the two crystals into Xianyuan Po's pocket and brought the water skin to his mouth, letting him drink a few mouthfuls. Tang 36 moved closer to Xianyuan Po's side and said something in a low voice. The Li Palace clergyman looked at the group from Orthodox Academy. He wanted to laugh, but didn't, saying, "Hurry up." Xianyuan Po, who had been urged, was a bit nervous. He almost choked on the water. Chen Chongxing quickly patted his back. Tang 36 even sped up his speech, reminding him to pay attention to matters during the match. The arena was a mess. Su Mo Yu, seeing this scene, couldn't help but shake his head and say, "Previously, all of you only cared about being bored and spaced out. Isn't it a bit too late to be anxious now? You don't understand. If I say it too early, I'm afraid he'll forget. Not to mention, we don't even know who's going to fight him. How can we teach him?" Tang 36 said without turning his head. Luoluo walked to Xianyuan Po's side and said, "Since we're already going to win, what's there to be nervous about?" Xianyuan Po stuttered a bit, saying, No other way." Chen Chongxing stared into his eyes and said, "Remember 36's words, we'll definitely win." Xianyuan Po forcefully nodded his head. At this point, Tang 36 had finally finished his impromptu pre-match guidance. He punched his chest and said, "Start well." As Xianyuan Po stood upon the ground that was covered in yellow sand, he raised his head to look at the black eaves that formed a circle and the dark blue sky that had been cut into a circular shape. He suddenly thought of the porcelain plates used to hold vegetables in the 100-herb garden. A creaking sound could be heard from behind him. The main door of the tower once again closed. He came back to his senses. Only then did he realize that he had been distracted. He didn't panic because of this. Instead, he remembered what Tang 36 had said a few nights ago, thinking to himself that this should be considered as him not being nervous anymore, right? He looked towards the opposite side, clasping his hands and greeting towards his opponent. At this moment, on the floor of the tower, there were only him and that examinee. No examiners could be seen, nor could any sounds from outside the tower be heard. It seemed as if there was some sort of sound-isolating formation in effect. At this moment, an emotionless voice came from above. If you're ready, then we'll begin. Xian Yuanpa looked up. He didn't see anyone, nor did he see any windows. He couldn't help but be curious as to where the examiners were hiding. He suddenly remembered what Chen Chongqing had reminded him of, hurriedly asking, What if someone dies? The tower was silent. The examiner that was hiding somewhere was silent for a long time. His opponent's expression was extremely ugly. The examiner's voice once again sounded, They can't be killed. Xian Yuanpa gave an O sound, looked towards his opponent and asked, Are you ready? His opponent was an examinee from Huangshan Valley. Huangshan Valley was located in the south. Not all disciples from the southern sects were able to participate in the grand examination, just like how the capital would hold a preliminary examination, the south would also hold a similar examination. This examinee from Huangshan Valley being able to pass the preliminary examination was already proof of his ability, not to mention the fact that the time he took to pass the martial trial was much shorter than most. This meant that the strength of his divine sense and the amount of true essence he possessed were both quite good. Previously, when he was choosing his opponent, it had been very difficult. That was because Orthodox Academy's recent reputation was too great. It didn't mean that he didn't have any confidence in himself. Furthermore, he had ultimately chosen Xian Yuanpa. This meant that, relatively speaking, he had a certain amount of confidence in defeating Xian Yuanpa, or perhaps a certain strategy. From the moment he entered the tower until now, Xian Yuanpa had first stared blankly at the sky, then asked such a question. How could this disciple from Huangshan Valley know that he was naturally simple and honest? He only felt that he was intentionally humiliating him. His mood was already extremely bad. He was instantly enraged, wanting nothing more than to cut this guy down with his sword. I've heard that you're already crippled. Are you ready to lose? The disciple from Huangshan Valley looked at Xian Yuanpa and sneered. Even though he said such words, he didn't take the initiative to attack. This was because, outside the tower, all the examinees had clearly heard. This burly Yao youth had used a thunderous voice to say that he was going to attack first, to close the distance between him and his opponent. He didn't know if Xian Yuanpa was purposely saying this to confuse him, or if he was truly prepared to do so, but after careful consideration, he obviously had to first consider retreating and increasing the distance between him and this Yao youth, then relying on his exquisite swordplay, he would have a good fight with this Yao youth. Without hesitation, this disciple from Huangshan Valley swiftly retreated, one step covering a distance of 5 zhang. At the same time, his sword left its sheath, bringing with it a gust of wind, circling in front of his body, suddenly forming a defensive stance. Seeing this scene, Xian Yuanpa was startled. He thought to himself, how did Tang 36 predict everything? Before, outside the tower, Tang 36 had said to him, at the start of the battle, his opponent would definitely retreat and use a defensive stance, so he didn't have to think about anything else. From the start, he would just advance, even if he burned all of his true essence to advance. No matter how his opponent's sword danced, no matter how his true essence was released, no matter how impenetrable it seemed, he just had to advance. Xian Yuanpa had indeed done so. When he asked his opponent if he was ready, the instant his opponent began to retreat, he had already begun to advance. When he was a little surprised at Tang 36's ability to predict everything and began to admire that guy, he had already advanced more than 10 zhang. Tang 36's predictions were very accurate, his words were close to the truth. Retreating is never faster than advancing. No one could have imagined that such a burly and big guy like Xian Yuanpa could be so fast. Because no one knew that Xian Yuanpa had been traversing between steep cliffs since he was young, hunting those lightning-fast red martens. Retreat? Fight? Xian Yuanpa, who was taught by Tang 36, would not give his opponent this kind of chance. The Yellow Mountain Valley disciple retreated 5 zhang, but he had already advanced more than 10 zhang and arrived in front of the Yellow Mountain Valley disciple. He could clearly see that his opponent's face was a little pale, and he could even see his own reflection in his opponent's eyes. The Yellow Mountain Valley disciple screamed. His sword rose like the wind and slashed towards Xian Yuanpo. The tip of the sword brought out a bright light. Xian Yuanpo remembered Tang 36 words. He didn't think about anything else. He only wanted to advance. He burned all of his true essence to advance. The opponent's sword weaved into a curtain. He didn't look or care, he continued to advance. His fists moved faster than his body. A buzzing sound. The wind from the fist carried with it countless flashing stars. It tore apart the sword wind and landed on the face of the Yellow Mountain Valley disciple. In his eyes, countless stars were reflected, as well as countless shock and disbelief. Wasn't Xian Yuanpo a new student of the Starseeker Academy? Hadn't he just entered the Tradition Academy for a few days? Wasn't he at the bottom of the honor roll of green clouds? Wasn't his right arm crippled? Then how could he make such a punch? Those stars, weren't they signs that only those in the upper stage of the meditation realm could have? The Yellow Mountain Valley disciple couldn't continue to think. Because Xian Yuanpo's fist had directly blown away his sword and landed on his body. Boom! The Yellow Mountain Valley disciple was like a stone, heavily smashing into the wall of the tower of purging dust that was 10 zhang away. The wind blew violently, dust flew everywhere. The Yellow Mountain Valley disciple seemed to have sunk into the wall. His clothes were torn and his body was covered in blood. Xian Yuanpo stopped. He looked at his own fist. His expression was a little confused. He thought to himself, why didn't he block? Within the tower of purging dust came the sound of hurried footstep. More than 10 examiners rushed to the scene, using the fastest speed possible. They began to treat the Yellow Mountain Valley disciple. An examiner walked in front of Xian Yuanpo. He pointed at him wanting to say something, but he didn't know what to say. Xian Yuanpo could tell that this examiner was the one who had spoken before. He looked at the Yellow Mountain Valley disciple who was being treated. He felt a little uneasy. He slowly asked, I didn't do anything wrong, did I? You just said that you can't kill people. If something happens to him, it has nothing to do with me. I've finally finished, I'm so tired. The next chapter is Chen Chongqing's appearance. This is his first fight in his life. What will it be like?